Chapter 610. You may rise, Du Qua. Noble consort Lu turned around and said indifferently. Du Qua stood up and asked bluntly, May I know why your majesty has summoned me here? Noble consort Lu smiled faintly and looked at Du Qua, asking slowly, Duke, how is the empress? Du Qua narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, Forgive me, I don't understand what you mean. If you really don't know, why did you come to see I? Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes and said, If I don't have solid information, why did I invite you to see me? It's a coincidence. Last night, a girl from I's palace passed by the imperial garden and happened to see a person leaving the palace with something.
She saw a corner of that thing.
It seemed to be the phoenix brocade that only the empress could wear. More coincidentally, the girl didn't know that person, but she described her to I had some impression of her. Du Qua said coldly, I don't know what you're talking about. If that's all you want to say, please forgive me for leaving. Du Qua cupped his hands and turned to leave. Noble consort Lu's cold eyes flashed, and she sneered. The empress is now in the Prince Ding mansion, isn't she? It was Feng San who took the empress away last night. Du Qua, do you really not care at all? Du Qua turned around and sneered. Since you're so confident, why don't you directly report it to King Li and the Empress Dowager? Instead of worrying about the Hua family and the Empress, why don't you worry about yourself, noble consort Lu? The late Emperor's edict is not so easy to change. Noble consort Lu's face darkened. Du Qua was warning her that if she interfered with the Empress's affairs, the Hua family had many ways to make the royal family carry out Mo Jingqi's edict immediately. In fact, it was not easy for Mo Jingqi's edict to be delayed until now. It was just that Mo Jingqi hadn't been buried yet, and the new emperor hadn't ascended the throne. With the Lu family and King Li around, no one mentioned the burial for the time being. But it had already been announced to the world. Sooner or later, the idle scholars would definitely mention it. If the Hua family interfered, it would be even more difficult to handle. Noble consort Lu watched as Du Qua turned around and left. The peach blossom in her hand was crushed into pieces. The light red flower juice stained her jade-like hand. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao received a message from Du Qua. He frowned and threw the letter on the table. Yili picked it up and looked at it. She frowned and said, How did noble consort Lu know about this? To be able to kidnap the empress out of the palace without a plan, do you expect him to have any rationality left? It wasn't surprising that he was discovered. Besides, I'm afraid noble consort Lu has an expert by her side, Mo Xiaoyao said. Master? Yili asked curiously. She couldn't imagine what kind of master noble consort Lu, who was born in the palace, would have. Could it be that the imperial palace was really full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons? Mo Xiaoyao said calmly, Noble consort Lu has always thought highly of herself. If it was a thesis, she might have a chance. But if it's a scheme, she's far from it. These things didn't seem to be her doing. Different from many noble ladies, noble consort Lu could be said to have been pampered all her life. She was born in the most powerful period of the Lu family. She was the only daughter of the same generation and was also very beautiful. At that time, the Lu family really doted on her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been raised to be so arrogant. After entering the palace, she was spoiled by Mo Jingqi without any principles. She didn't need to use her brain to scheme against others. Noble consort Lu, who was used to doing whatever she wanted, was indeed not very good at scheming. Otherwise, she wouldn't have aroused Mo Jingqi's suspicion when he was dying and failed. Yili didn't know noble consort Lu well, but after several confrontations, Yili could feel that noble consort Lu was not a scheming person. She could tell from the way she pestered Mo Xiaoyao. Thinking about it, Yili asked, Who do you suspect? Mo Xiaoyao smiled and simply said, Tanjiji. Tanjiji? Yili paused. She hadn't mentioned this name for a long time. Since Xu Manlin was killed by Princess Anqi, Tanjiji's whereabouts were unknown. After that, Ren Qining appeared, which made them shift their attention away from Tanjiji. They didn't expect that Tanjiji would sneak back to the capital. Mo Xiaoyao said, Tanjiji quietly stayed by Mo Jingqi's side for 10 years. Since he wasn't sincerely loyal to Mo Jingqi, he couldn't have done nothing in the past 10 years, right? So I guess he not only knows Su Zuidi and noble consort Lu, but also knows Mo Jingli. Hearing this, Yili was surprised and frowned. Then the medicine Mo Jingli brought back from Nanjiang. It was Tan Jiji who revealed the news to him. Mo Xiuyao continued, the sacred land of Nanjiang has always been in Xu Manlin's hands. Even if Princess Xixiao's relationship with Princess Anqi is weak, she is still Princess Anqi's sister. Xu Manlin couldn't have done anything to her. The news that the sacred land of Nanjiang has this medicine could only be told by Tan Jiji or Xu Manlin. Yili was silent. If this was true, Tan Jiji must have played a part in Mo Jingqi's death. Rubbing between her eyebrows, Yili had to admit that she really wasn't suited for these schemes. If so, what do Tan Jiji and noble consort Lu want to do this time? Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said carelessly, don't worry. If they want to leak the news, they won't talk to the old duke. Since that's the case, they must want something. If we don't do anything, they will come to us. He was sitting in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if Mo Jingli really suspected that the Empress was in the Prince Ding mansion, would he dare to come in and search? Besides, Mo Jingli probably wanted them to take the Empress away so that he could have something against the Hua family and prevent the Hua family from causing trouble for him in the future. Mo Xiuyao had no intention of interfering in the affairs of the capital, so he didn't care about most of the things. But Feng Zhiyao and the Empress meant something different to him. Since Feng Zhiyao had brought them out, he naturally didn't mind spending some effort to take them away. Yili frowned and said, no matter what, it's uncomfortable to have someone peeping in the dark. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, since Miss Li feels uncomfortable, then we'll just deal with him. Princess consort. Something has happened. Just as they were speaking, Zhuo Jing rushed in and reported without even bowing. Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow. What is it? The Feng family has been raided. Zhuo Jing reported. Mo Xiuyao faintly glanced at Zhuo Jing and asked, what is this? Although the Feng family was one of the 4 wealthiest families in Great Chu and was also Feng Zhiyao's family did not dare to offend them. But they weren't people of the Prince Ding mansion. Therefore, it didn't matter to Mo Xiuyao whether or not the Feng family was raided. Zhuo Jing was also a bit embarrassed. As soon as he received the news, he quickly came in to report. He forgot that the Feng family had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion other than their relationship with Master Feng San. Yili smiled faintly and said, forget it. Let's tell Feng San. After all, he is his biological father. Zhuo Jing agreed. Before he turned to leave, Feng Zhiyao had already appeared outside the door and said faintly, no need. I already know. Feng Zhiyao and the Empress walked in one after the other. Their expressions were not good. Clearly, Feng Zhiyao had rushed over after hearing about this. His face was still a bit pale, but the sadness in his eyes had dissipated a lot. Feng Zhiyao looked apologetically at Mo Xiuyao. Prince, Mo Xiuyao waved his hand and smiled a bit fakely. No need to apologize to I. Right now, no one in the Chu capital dares to cause trouble for I. If you don't feel guilty towards the Feng family, let's go back to Li City? Feng Zhiyao smiled bitterly. He didn't have any feelings towards the Feng family. But it wasn't to the point where he could ignore the Feng family being raided. In the end, he didn't have any deep hatred towards the Feng family. He just chose a different path. This time, the Feng family was truly implicated by him. This subordinate will definitely take care of this matter. Feng Zhiyao said in a low voice. Mo Xiuyao squinted and said, how do you want to take care of it? After robbing the palace, do you want to rob the prison again? Or, do you want to walk right into the trap and say that it was you, young Master Feng San, who robbed the Empress? Feng Zhiyao looked speechlessly at the lazy, white-clothed, white-haired man in front of him. They had known each other for a few decades. He understood Mo Xiuyao well enough. He was saying this to help him take care of the problem. But Feng Zhiyao's heart was very uneasy. This matter was indeed caused by him being too impulsive. If he had endured and come back to discuss with Mo Xiuyao might not have stopped him. He might even have helped him. Now that he had made a mistake, he needed the Prince Ding mansion to take care of it for him. This made Feng Jiao secretly regret his impulsiveness. Don't act like this in front of I. Bring Tan Jiji to the Prince Ding mansion in 3 hours. Otherwise. He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was self-evident. Feng Jiao's spirit was shaken. He said loudly, "This subordinate obeys. I'll go immediately." He looked back at the Empress sitting on the side. The Empress smiled faintly and said, "You go do what you need to do. I'll talk to Prince Ding and the princess." Hearing this, Feng Jiao's face lit up. His tone was a lot lighter. He looked at the Empress and said, "Wait for me. I'll be back soon." After speaking, he walked out of the parlor with light steps. It didn't look like he was injured at all. Seeing the bright red brocade clothes disappear at the door, the Empress sighed helplessly. She looked apologetically at Yi Li and Emo Xiaoyao and said, "I've troubled you." Emo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "Feng Sen has been enslaved by I for more than 10 years. It's not a big deal to occasionally help him solve some problems. I don't want to hear anything else. It's better to wait for Feng San to come back. If he comes back and you're gone, I'm afraid I'll have one less capable fighter." The Empress couldn't help but smile. She shook her head and said, "After so many years, your friendship with Ah Yao hasn't changed. Thank you for taking care of him all these years." Emo Xiaoyao waved his hand indifferently and said, "Feng San isn't just a subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. He's also a brother that I grew up with." Maybe Su Qingchun was more intelligent than Feng San. Maybe Zhang Qilon and the others were better at fighting than Feng San. But only Feng San was a brother that grew up with him. He was a brother that accompanied him through the most painful years. There weren't many friendships like this in life. Maybe there were a few in the past. But after so many years, only Feng Jiao hadn't changed. Chapter 611. Although most of the Prince Ding mansion's power had left the capital for a long time, when Emo Xiaoyao truly wanted to find someone, it was very easy. After all, the Prince Ding mansion had operated in the Chu capital for close to 200 years, not 10 or 8 years. The depth of its foundation was not something that Tan Jiji, a descendant of the previous dynasty who could barely walk in broad daylight, could understand. Therefore, when Tan Jiji was politely invited to the Prince Ding mansion by the people of the Prince Ding mansion, he still couldn't hide his shocked expression. In the main hall, Emo Xiaoyao stared at the middle-aged man in the hall with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "Young Master Tan, how do you think I should greet you this time? Or, do you have something that you can use to exchange for your life with I?" Hearing this, Tan Jiji really didn't want to argue. For someone like Emo Xiaoyao, once he decided on the result, no matter how you argued, it was meaningless. However, he had to work hard for his name. After all, he wasn't tired of living. He smiled helplessly and said, "The Prince Ding mansion's foundation is indeed deep. I have nothing to say about it falling into the hands of the prince. It's just, I don't know what I've done to anger your highness." Emo Xiaoyao looked at Tan Jiji with interest. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Could it be that young Master Tan thinks that I called you here to drink tea?" Tan Jiji sighed. Of course he knew why Emo Xiaoyao called him here. He just didn't think that he would be found so quickly. Sighing, Tan Jiji said straightforwardly, "I can't do anything about what the prince said. Although the idea came from me, I really can't do anything about the Chu State's court right now. Therefore, young Master Feng San, please forgive me." After speaking, Tan Jiji cupped his hands in apology to Feng Jiao, whose face hadn't changed since he saw him. Feng Jiao sneered and ignored Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji also didn't care much and sat calmly drinking tea. Emo Xiaoyao leaned against the back of the chair, seemingly leisurely sizing up Tan Jiji. However, even though Tan Jiji looked calm on the surface, his heart was actually stretched taut. Emo Xiaoyao's gaze on him seemed ordinary, but in reality, the pressure he felt was no different from a real sword. He knew that now that he had fallen into Emo Xiaoyao's hands, his life or death would depend entirely on Emo Xiaoyao's mood. After a while, Emo Xiaoyao seemed to have seen enough before slowly retracting his gaze. His lips curled into a mocking smile. "Young Master Tan, are you here chatting idly with I? Are you waiting for someone to save you?" Tan Jiji was stunned. The smile on his face became even more bitter. Since I've already fallen into the prince's hands, I don't dare to think about it. He truly didn't have much hope for those people. Tan Jiji had always been proud of his foresight. Compared to Mo Xiaoyao's scheming people in the Chu capital, he was far inferior. Falling into Mo Xiaoyao's hands wasn't a loss. After all, he had helped Mo Xiaoyao plot against Mo Xiaoyao many times. In fact, he had almost been able to completely destroy the Prince Ding mansion. He just couldn't accept it. He had great ambitions all his life, but in the blink of an eye, he was almost 40 years old and still hadn't accomplished anything. Now that he had fallen into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, his chances of survival were even slimmer. Mo Xiaoyao naturally saw the unwillingness in Tan Jiji's eyes. He looked at Tan Jiji with a smile and said, "Young Master Tan, are you unwilling to accept that all these years of hard work have been for nothing? I'm afraid it's not for nothing. Instead, it's for someone else." Tan Jiji glanced at Yili, who had been sitting silently beside Mo Xiaoyao. He said with some annoyance, "Speaking of which, it seems that ever since the prince married the princess, the Prince Ding mansion's fortunes have changed. Rather than saying that he's making things difficult for the Prince Ding mansion, it's better to say that he wants the Prince Ding mansion to openly cut ties with the Daichu state." Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and smiled at Yili. He turned to look at Tan Jiji with some regret. "If it weren't for those things in the past, I really hope that someone like young Master Tan can stay in the Prince Ding mansion. Actually, young Master Tan, you don't need to be upset. Even if your original plan succeeded, the person who would have the last laugh wouldn't be you. Because you've walked in the wrong direction from the start. Look at Ren Qining. Does young Master Tan still not know the difference between you and him?" Tan Jiji's expression changed. If there was anything in this world that was a sore spot for someone like Tan Jiji, it was without a doubt Ren Qining. Ever since Ren Qining appeared as a descendant of the previous dynasty and with the identity of Lin Yuan, Tan Jiji had felt very uneasy. There was only one Lin Yuan. If Ren Qining was an orphan of the previous dynasty, then what was Tan Jiji? If he wasn't a descendant of the previous dynasty, then what was the purpose of his actions in the past half of his life? Tan Jiji didn't look for Ren Qining, nor did he look for Dr. Lin to ask, because he faintly felt that the answer was something he didn't want to see. "It seems that this matter doesn't need the prince's concern," Tan Jiji said with an ugly expression. Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and said, "Indeed, it has nothing to do with I. Whether it's you or Ren Qining, I have never placed them in my eyes. Prince, you're too confident. Don't forget how miserable the Prince Ding mansion was when it fell." Logically speaking, Tan Jiji knew that he definitely didn't dare to talk back to Mo Xiaoyao. But when he saw Mo Xiaoyao's nonchalance and indifference, the anger in his heart couldn't help but rise. The most infuriating thing wasn't that you couldn't win against your enemy, but that your enemy had never placed you in his eyes from start to finish. So, young Master Tan and Mo Jingqi have clearly done something stupid. Could it be that you think that if the Prince Ding mansion wasn't a subject of the Daichu state, with Mo Jingqi's insignificant ability, he would be able to scheme against my big brother? Back then, the heir of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaowen, although he didn't have the same reputation as his younger brother, he was indeed one of the people that Mo Xiaoyao respected the most. To be able to convince someone like Mo Xiaoyao, it definitely wasn't something that could be done with just the identity of an older brother. And now, in this world, who can stop me? Tan Jiji snorted lightly, his eyes revealing his disbelief. But that gaze was somewhat deliberate and forced. Mo Xiaoyao didn't mind and waved his hand to have someone take him away. Tan Jiji still had some use, so he didn't have to kill him for now. But he definitely wouldn't let him escape from his hands a second time. Feng Jiao rudely took Tan Jiji, whose martial arts had been restrained, away, leaving only Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao sitting opposite each other in the hall. Yi Li unhurriedly replaced the cold tea and poured a new cup of hot tea. She smiled at the white-haired man sitting opposite her and asked, "Prince, do you have any plans?" Someone like Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji wasn't a big deal. He had fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion and had his martial arts restrained. As long as he was still in the Prince Ding mansion, even if he was thrown into jail, he wouldn't be able to leave the Prince Ding mansion, let alone find out any news. But Yili remembered that Dr. Lin was still in the northwest. Last time, when she went back, she didn't ask Dr. Lin about Tanjiji. After so many years of interaction and the kindness of saving her life and teaching her, Yili really treated that old man as a family member. She didn't want to make the old man too sad. Chapter 612. He's just a clown. Mo Xiaoyao said blandly, "Don't worry, Lili. I will take care of the relationship between Tanjiji and Dr. Lin." Yili nodded. As long as Mo Xiaoyao promised something, he was always very reliable. After a little consideration, she threw it to the back of her mind and said to Mo Xiaoyao, "There's nothing to do in the capital. Let's go back to the northwest." She was afraid that if she delayed any longer, her big brother would really get angry when they got back. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and smiled happily. "We took care of the Feng family's matter this time. The matter of the new emperor ascending the throne should have come to a conclusion. Then let's go back to the northwest." Although Mo Xiaoyao threw most of the work to Su Qingchen from time to time, he still knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. If he squeezed too much and Su Qingchen ran away, then the gains would not make up for the losses. The Feng family was very unlucky this time. Although it was said that scholars, farmers, businessmen, and businessmen were the worst, businessmen who were able to reach the Feng family's level were definitely more glorious than most people. What's more, the Feng family was the only one among the 4 richest families in the Chu state that had a foothold in the capital and had some relations with the imperial family. Normally, everyone would give them some face. However, ever since the emperor passed away, the Feng family was divided into several factions. They quarreled endlessly over which side to support. Before they could reach a conclusion, the Feng family had already been cleanly raided. They didn't even have time to figure out why they were raided. The family of hundreds of people were locked up in the capital's Supreme Court's prison. As the saying goes, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The Feng family had been raided without any warning. From top to bottom, everyone was thrown into prison. Those who had a good relationship with them would naturally avoid them like the plague, not to mention those who were waiting for the Feng family to fall so that they could get a share of the profits. How could there be anyone to take care of them? The noble madams, young masters, and young ladies who were originally living a life of luxury were suddenly thrown into a dirty and dark prison. Naturally, they would cry endlessly. The head of the Feng family, Feng Xiao's biological father, Feng Huiting, was locked in a solitary cell. Compared to the crying of his wife, concubines, children, and the other members of the Feng family, he was much calmer. He only leaned against the wall and sat in the corner of the cell. He didn't even respond to Madame Feng's calls. As soon as Feng Xiao entered the Supreme Court, he was stopped. Originally, according to the orders from above, although Feng Xiao's relationship with the Feng family was cold, he was still a concubine's son of the Feng family. He would definitely be imprisoned. However, Feng Xiao had another identity. He was Prince Ding's confidant and the deputy general of the Mahist army. The person who went to arrest them did not dare to go to the Prince Ding mansion personally to arrest them. He could only report it to his superiors, but in the end, the matter was left unsettled. However, it was impossible for young Master Feng San to enter the Supreme Court to visit the Feng family. Feng Xiao gloomily stared at the Supreme Court official with a fake smile in front of him. After the Feng family was thrown into prison, he had been busy capturing Tanjiji. He only had time to visit after completing Prince Ding's orders. However, he was blocked outside the door. It was easy to imagine how bad Feng Xiao's mood was, as he had not slept for 2 days. "Get out of my way." Feng Xiao was cold. His usually elegant smile was dyed with a bit of cruelty, but it made the person in front of him shiver involuntarily. "Young Master Feng San, for Prince Ding's sake, the court is already gracious to not make things difficult for you. Don't fail to appreciate kindness." Perhaps it was because he realized that he had been so casually frightened by a junior, the old man in front of him was anxious to regain his lost face, and spoke righteously. Feng Xiao disdainfully snorted. "If you have the ability, then lock this young master up as well." This young master has never heard of the Supreme Court not allowing people to visit the prison. It was true that the Supreme Court did not allow people to casually visit the prison, but there were still some hidden rules in the officialdom. As long as one had money, there was no place that was inconvenient to go except the imperial palace. However, Feng Jiao did not plan on giving money. He looked at the righteous old man with a smile that was not a smile. Do you need this young master to tell the people from the censorate how much benefits official Wang has received in the Supreme Court in the past 7 years? Official Wang's expression changed. He glanced at his subordinates who had their heads down and pretended not to hear anything. He stared at Feng Jiao for a long time before dryly coughing and saying, "Since young Master Feng Sand is a member of the Prince Ding mansion, this official naturally cannot come. I have come to ask young Master Feng Sand to quickly come out." Feng Jiao coldly laughed and said, "This young master coming here has nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion." After saying this, he did not care about official Wang's expression and walked into the prison with a wave of his sleeve. As soon as he walked into the prison, he was greeted with a cold and rotten aura. Both sides of the corridor were filled with pairs of filthy black hands that wanted to pull on passers-by. Feng Jiao lightly snorted. His sharp eyes swept to the sides, and the prisoners who wanted to pull on him immediately withdrew their hands. People who had been in prison for a long time had the instinct to seek good fortune and avoid harm. Even if Feng Jiao's appearance was handsome and luxurious, like a distinguished young master from a prestigious family, the evil aura accumulated from over a decade of war was not something these prisoners could resist. The Feng family members were locked in the innermost part of the prison. Before he even stepped in, he could smell the strange stench coming from inside. Feng Jiao could not help but knit his brows. His half-closed eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. Walking into the place where the Feng family members were locked up, Feng Jiao's expression was complicated as he looked at the man resting in the innermost cell. Feng Huiting, who was almost 60 years old, looked much younger than his actual age. Even in this dark and dirty cell, he was much neater than the crying and noisy Feng family members in the next cell. Feng Jiao found that compared to when he left the capital many years ago, there was much more white hair on his temples. 6 years ago, when Feng Jiao returned to the capital, he did not listen to Su Hongyan's advice and went back to see him. Thinking about it, the father and son had already seen each other every day for 7 or 8 years. Feng Jiao closed his eyes and hid the unnecessary emotions in his eyes. Feng Jiao's sudden appearance caused the noisy Feng family members to immediately quiet down. The red-clothed man standing in the corridor was wearing a luxurious red brocade robe. No matter where he was, his handsome and outstanding appearance caused the dark cell to suddenly light up. The Feng family members were not familiar with Feng Jiao. Since Feng Jiao was 8 or 9 years old, he had spent more time in the Prince Ding mansion and outside than at home. But looking at the red-clothed man in front of them, someone finally remembered that many years ago, there was a Feng family member who was always dressed in red no matter where or when. It was unknown who suddenly called out, "Feng Jiao's big brother, second brother, long time no see. How have you been?" Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and showed a slightly malicious fake smile to the 2 middle-aged men not far away. No matter how many years had passed, Feng Jiao still could not like his 2 brothers. When he was a child, they were existences that he envied and feared. When he was a teenager, they were the objects of his disgust and hatred. But now, Feng Jiao, who had long matured, had already left these 2 brothers far behind him. The hatred that he thought was deep in his bones when he was a teenager was now only a faint, instinctive disgust. "Feng Jiao, why are you here?" The second son of the Feng family, Feng Ziyuan, stared at his third brother who he had not seen for many years, and asked with some displeasure. The grudges when they were young were probably just children who did not know how to behave, but the grudges when they were young were more related to interests. At that time, the Feng family forced the head of the family to drive Feng Jiao out of the Feng family because he was close to the Prince Ding mansion. After Feng Jiao followed Prince Ding to the northwest, they publicly broke off their relationship with him. But now, Feng Jiao was like a fish in water in the Prince Ding mansion. On the contrary, they were reduced to this state. The faces of the 2 sons of the Feng family were not very good. Third brother. Third brother. Save me. It's none of my business. Save me. A middle-aged woman scrambled to the railing and reached out to grab Feng Jiao's clothes as she cried. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. The Liu family and Prince Li were well prepared. Not only did they capture the people of the Feng family, but they even captured their married daughter. It didn't seem like they were just threatening him and the Prince Ding mansion. Thinking of Immerse Xiaoyao's casual smile when he was about to leave, Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. What are you doing here? When Feng Ziyuan called out Feng Jiao's name for the first time, Feng Huiting opened his eyes and looked at the luxurious man in red outside. An inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes, but it quickly disappeared as he asked calmly. The cold voice made Feng Ziyao's heart feel stifled, but the smile on his face became more and more brilliant. Of course I'm here to see you, father. You look good. Meddlesome. Feng Huiting said coldly, you are no longer a descendant of the Feng family. Whatever happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with you. I don't need you to come and visit me. If there's nothing else, go back. After speaking, Feng Huiting closed his eyes again and ignored Feng Ziyao's changed expression. Father, what are you talking about? The Feng family's fourth young miss next to him said with dissatisfaction. Third brother is Prince Ding's confidant. Third brother must be here to save us. Third brother, let me out quickly. Feng Ziao originally felt a little guilty, but after being provoked by Feng Huiting's cold words, anger suddenly surged in his heart. He sneered and pulled back his clothes that were grabbed by Feng Si. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Sorry, as Master Feng said, I'm no longer a member of the Feng family. What happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with me. Right now, I'm just here to watch the show. Little bastard. Even if the Feng family is in dire straits, it's not your turn to gloat. Maybe the Feng family was harmed by a slut like you. The Lady Feng on the side suddenly cursed. Hearing this, Feng Jiao looked at the Lady Feng with some surprise. The Lady Feng had always relied on her status as the official wife. Although she never looked at a bastard like him, she always had a magnanimous and virtuous appearance on the surface. She would never do anything that would cause people to gossip. Aside from her two sons bullying her and pushing them out without leaving a trace, the Lady Feng was really not bad compared to the vicious and merciless women in the inner residence. He didn't think that she would be unable to hold back at this time. Shut up. Feng Huiting suddenly spoke and coldly said, filthy words. Could it be that after going to prison, your manners were all eaten by dogs? The Lady Feng choked. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything for a long time. Chapter 613. Coldly looking at Feng Huiting and Madame Wang, Feng Ziao snorted and turned his head away in disdain. It had always been like this. Ever since he was a child, his father only cared about his official wife and son. No matter how hard he tried, he was always ignored. Feng Jiao suddenly felt angry and powerless. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. A graceful white figure flashed through his mind. Feng Jiao's eyes, which had a trace of resentment, suddenly became much gentler. Yes, even without the Feng family, he still had other things. Immerse Xiaoyao, who grew up like a brother, and his colleagues and comrades in arms, whom he had known for many years. Perhaps soon he would have his own family. Thinking of the graceful figure in the Prince Ding mansion, the depression in Feng Jiao's heart suddenly dissipated. He raised his head and looked proudly at Feng Huiting in the corner. I have already reported to the prince. You can come out soon. In the future, humph. In the end, he didn't say anything decisive. Feng Jiao snorted and turned to walk out. So, what if they were implicated by him? His head must have been clamped by a door for him to feel guilty. Save them, and in the future, they wouldn't owe each other anything. Feng Huiting silently watched the red figure turn and leave. In the dark corner, a trace of relief flashed through his old eyes. Noble consort Nyang has arrived. The Prince Regent has arrived. Feng Jiao hadn't taken a few steps when a loud report came from the door. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. It was one thing for Mo Jingli to come, but even noble consort Liu had come. It seemed that Duqua was right. Not only could noble consort Lu move freely in the palace, she could even leave the palace at will. It seemed that she had really grasped Prince Li's major weakness. Not in a hurry to leave, Feng Jiao turned and slowly walked back. On the other side of the cell, noble consort Lu in white looked at the dirty environment in front of her and frowned in disgust. No amount of incense could cover up the stench in the cell. Noble consort Lu looked at Mo Jingli beside her and said unhappily, "I really don't understand. Why do you have to come to a place like this in person?" Mo Jingli said indifferently, "I don't seem to have asked noble consort Lu to come." Noble consort Lu snorted. Of course, Mo Jingli didn't ask her to come. However, Tan Jiji was missing, and there was no one around her to give her advice. If she did not follow him, how would she know what Mo Jingli was up to? Mo Jingli didn't care about the dark and filthy cell. He walked in and said, "You don't have to treat I like this. The Feng family is just a businessman. Even if I want to do something, I won't do it to them." Noble consort Lu's heart moved. The Feng family did not have enough power to move Mo Jingli in the court, but their money was enough to move anyone. "Do you want the Feng family's money?" Mo Jingli said indifferently, "Do you think the Feng family is easy to offend? Because of your words, I confiscated the entire Feng family. Since you have already offended them, why don't you just offend them so that they will never rise again? You make it sound nice. The Feng family is Mo Jingqi's people. Naturally, they will not be loyal to you. Instead of letting others take advantage of them, it is better to accept them yourself. Even if I didn't do this, you would have done something to the Feng family sooner or later." Noble consort Lu sneered. Mo Jingli didn't deny it. While talking, the two had turned the corner and reached the innermost part of the cell. However, they saw a figure who shouldn't have been here standing leisurely in the corridor. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at them with a smile. "Feng Jiao, how dare you?" Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes slightly and sneered. The smile on Feng Jiao's face deepened, as if he was in a very good mood. "No matter how bold I am, I can't compare with noble consort. No, it's great noble consort who is about to be buried with me. As an imperial concubine, how dare you leave the palace at will? As an imperial concubine who is going to be buried with me, how dare you still live?" Feng Jiao. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and stared at Feng Jiao with a cold face. The Prince Ding mansion caught eyes, people. "You go back and tell Prince Ding that I will personally go to him to ask for them." Feng Jiao waved his hand and smiled. "You don't have to go to him personally. I'm afraid that noble consort Lu has an ulterior motive. Asking for the people is fake, and taking the opportunity to pester our prince is the real reason. Our princess is very jealous, so for the peace of the prince and the Prince Ding mansion, I will decline noble consort Lu's kindness on behalf of the prince." "How dare you?" Noble consort Lu angrily rebuked. She wasn't afraid of the whole world knowing that she liked Mo Xiao, but she also hated others who mocked her affection. Mo Jingli frowned and unhappily interrupted the verbal contest between the two. "I didn't come to listen to your nonsense. Feng San, you are really bold. Do you think that you can break into the Supreme Court with the support of the Prince Ding mansion?" Feng Jiao smiled faintly. "Not at all. Prince, you flatter me. Didn't His Highness raid the Feng family without any evidence or crime? Compared to your Highness, this one's ability is simply not worth mentioning." Seeing Feng Jiao, he naturally thought of the people behind Feng Jiao. This made Mo Jingli couldn't help but frown. He didn't want to fight with Mo Xiao now, nor did he plan to provoke Mo Xiao. But Mo Xiao stayed in the capital for a long time, which made many of his plans unable to be implemented. Mo Jingli didn't ask noble consort Lu why she wanted to capture the people of the Feng family. He was going to make a move against the Feng family, anyway. With noble consort Lu as a shield, it was much better for his reputation. Why not? But he always thought that the relationship between Feng San and the Feng family was weak. Feng San intervened in the Feng family's affairs on behalf of himself, or the position of the entire Prince Ding mansion. Or Mo Xiao also had his eyes on the fat meat of the Feng family. Frowning, Mo Jingli asked, "How is Prince Ding?" Feng Xiao looked at Mo Jingli in front of him in surprise. A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. If Mo Jingli mentioned Mo Xiao a few years ago, it would be considered very well-mannered if he didn't curse or ridicule him. Now he could actually ask so calmly. Sure enough, power was the easiest thing to change a person's appearance. Nodding, Feng Xiao said with a smile, "Thank you for your concern, Prince Li. Our prince has always been well." "Is that so?" Mo Jingli said, "I seem to have heard that Shilling Genom of Gojoseon seems to be interested in increasing the number of troops at the border. I wonder if Prince Ding has any plans?" Feng Xiao said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Prince said that he is on vacation. Everything is handed over to young Master Qingchen to handle. I'm afraid that Prince will have to ask young Master Qingchen about this matter. Mo Jingli and Feng Xiao could be considered acquaintances. He knew that if he really beat around the bush with him, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to talk about anything serious until tomorrow morning. He could only take the initiative to change the topic. "Young Master Feng, are you here to see Master Feng?" Feng Xiao shrugged as an answer. Mo Jingli said faintly, "Speaking of the Feng family's matter, the Prince Ding mansion is also somewhat related. However, I don't have the final say on this matter. Otherwise, for the sake of Prince Ding, it's not a big deal to make things easy for young Master Feng." Feng Xiao looked down. Was Mo Jingli telling him that he wasn't the one who was targeting the Feng family? He sneered in his heart. He would be a fool to believe Mo Jingli. He glanced at noble consort Lu beside him faintly. This woman was probably the one who was being used. Sure enough, she was an idiot with a beautiful face. No wonder Prince didn't like her. Chapter 614. Thank you, Prince, for your concern. I'm just here to take a look. Anyway, the Feng family doesn't need me to worry about someone who has been expelled from the family, right? Presumably, Prince and noble consort Lu have other matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first." Feng Xiao was about to leave after casually cupping his hands in salute to Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu.
Wait.
Noble consort Lu suddenly spoke. Feng Xiao turned around and looked at noble consort Lu indifferently. Noble consort Lu proudly said, "You can't leave." Feng Xiao suddenly smiled. "Why not? You trespassed into the Supreme Court. Do you think the Supreme Court is a place where you can come and go as you please?" Noble consort Lu said coldly. So, noble consort Lu just wanted to find an excuse to make him stay. Feng Xiao didn't care and asked indifferently, "What do you want? If I want to leave, can you make me stay?" Feng Xiao's skills were a bit difficult to deal with a first-rate master like Mo Xiao. But it wasn't difficult to deal with Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu in this narrow alley. Before he finished speaking, Mo Jingli had already retreated to the side without leaving a trace. He had fought with Feng Xiao when he was young and knew that he was no match for him. In this narrow cell, not many guards could get in. If he was caught or accidentally injured by Feng Xiao, it wouldn't look good. Noble consort Lu certainly didn't want to fight with Feng Xiao. She sneered, "If you dare to leave, I'll kill Feng Huiting." Feng Xiao looked down. After a while, he sighed helplessly and threw a short knife on the ground from his sleeve. He spread his hands at noble consort Lu to show that he didn't have a weapon. Noble consort Lu was satisfied. She waved her hand and had someone come forward to catch Feng Xiao. At the same time, she ordered, "Bring Feng Huiting out as well. I want to take these two away." "King Li, is that all right?" Mo Jingli said impatiently. "Up to you." What he wanted was the Feng family's assets. In the past few years, the two sons of the Feng family had taken over the family business, one after another. It didn't matter whether Feng Huiting was there or not. However, he still reminded him, "You'd better be careful. Don't overreach yourself. If you anger Mo Xiao, you won't have to die with him." Noble consort Lu snorted discontentedly. From the bottom of her heart, she didn't believe that Mo Xiao would kill her. "I naturally know my limits." Feng Xiao was taken away by noble consort Lu without any resistance. Only Feng Huiting was with him. The rest of the Feng family was left to Mo Jingli to deal with. Feng Xiao didn't care about what Mo Jingli planned to do. At least compared to the half-crazy Mo Jingqi and the self-righteous, noble consort Lu, Mo Jingli still knew his limits most of the time. The Feng family fell into his hands. As long as the people of the Prince Ding mansion were still in the capital, at least their names were guaranteed. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao, who had just received a report from his subordinate, raised his sword-like eyebrows and asked with a smile, "So, Feng Xiao was captured by noble consort Lu?" The shadow guard, who was standing a few steps away, couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to retreat a little further without leaving a trace to avoid the prince's seemingly peaceful, but actually icy cold flames. But when he met Mo Xiaoyao's smiling eyes, he froze. He braced himself and replied, "Prince, noble consort Lu not only captured young Master Feng San from the Supreme Court, but also took away the Feng family's patriarch, Feng Huiting." Mo Xiaoyao snorted softly and didn't speak. Yili raised her hand and covered Mo Xiaoyao's arm. She smiled faintly and said, "Feng Huiting is Feng San's father after all. If Feng San really doesn't care, then he wouldn't be Feng San." How many people in this world could have a heart of stone that didn't care about anything? No matter how much the Feng family neglected Feng Xiao, Feng Huiting was still Feng Xiao's biological father. It was impossible for Feng Xiao to not care about him at all. Just like Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu's days in the Leng family might not be better than Feng Xiao's, but when he heard that Ling Huai was besieged, Leng Haoyu still remembered it like it was something. Mo Xiaoyao rolled his eyes unhappily. He looked at Yi Li with some grievance and said, "I didn't say that I wouldn't save Feng Huiting. Why is Feng San sacrificing himself now?" Yi Li smiled and said, "I'm afraid this is an accident. Feng Xiao might not have known that noble consort Lu and Prince Li would so coincidentally choose to go to the Supreme Court at that time. It seems that this time, not only the Lu family but even Prince Li is involved in the Feng family's matter." Mo Xiaoyao was not surprised. Now, most of the power in the capital is in the hands of Mo Jingli. Without his consent, the Lu family would have to think twice if they want to touch the Feng family. I'm afraid that it's not the Lu family that wants to touch the Feng family, but Mo Jingli that wants to touch the Feng family. Yi Li's heart moved. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "The Feng family's property? Mo Jingli controls the wealthiest place in the entire Dechu state. After all these years, he shouldn't be lacking money." Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "That's not necessarily true. Although Mo Jingli controls most of the southern part of the Dechu state, his foundation is still very weak. In the end, his foundation is shallow. Jiangnan has a lot of aristocratic families, and their relationships are complicated. It's not that easy for Mo Jingli to get money from these people. And raising an army is a money-burning matter." "You're saying Mo Jingli is secretly expanding the army?" Yi Li naturally understood. She couldn't help but frown when she thought of her own guess. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and nodded. Mo Jingli hasn't just wanted that dragon throne for a day or two. When the new emperor ascends the throne, we'll return to the northwest. I won't be in the mood to play with him." Yi Li frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, "Since it's like this, why must we wait until the new emperor ascends the throne? Because I like to make things difficult for him." As long as Mo Xiaoyao was in the capital, even if Mo Jingli really wanted to usurp the throne, he wouldn't have the guts. Prince. The subordinate, who didn't get a reply, was still standing alone in the hall. He pitifully looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who had clearly forgotten about his existence. "Is there anything else?" Mo Xiaoyao asked. Finally finding a chance to speak, the pitiful person hurriedly used the fastest speed to clearly report what she wanted to say. "Just now, I received news from Noble Consort Lu that Noble Consort Lu will be visiting Ding Palace tomorrow morning and has some matters to discuss with Wang Yi. Wang Yi, please do not refuse." A certain person who was holding her breath and did not pause for even a moment breathed a sigh of relief. "Noble Consort Lu? Visit? Don't refuse?" Mo Xiaoyao asked with a smile. The messenger was crying in his heart, "Your Highness, This subordinate is just a messenger. This has nothing to do with me. Yili laughed and pulled Imo Xiao. She smiled at the subordinate and said, "All right, Prince knows. You can leave." "Thank you, Princess." This subordinate will take his leave. The person who let out a sigh of relief turned around and disappeared from the entrance of the hall. In an unknown prison cell, Feng Jiao sat leisurely on the simple bed in the cell. Feng Huiting, who was locked in the cell next door, was still sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. He had no intention of communicating with Feng Jiao. Feng Jiao sat at the head of the bed and looked at the man in front of him, whose hair was almost white. He snorted softly and walked to the railing to knock on it a few times. After a while, someone came in and stared vigilantly at Feng Jiao. He asked, "Third young master Feng, what is the matter?" Feng Jiao was instantly amused.
"Oh,
"You know me?" Feng Jiao casually looked at the inconspicuous middle-aged man in front of him. He didn't have any impression of him, but he could see that his martial arts weren't bad. Feng Jiao said, "Bring me a cloak. Do you want to freeze this young master to death?" The middle-aged man faintly glanced at Feng Jiao and turned to leave. After a while, he came in with a dark green brocade rabbit-skin cloak. He handed it to Feng Jiao and then turned to leave. Feng Jiao looked at the dark green cloak in his hand and smiled thoughtfully. He raised his hand and the cloak passed through the bars of the two cells without any obstruction and landed on Feng Huiting's body. Feng Huiting opened his eyes and stared blankly at the cloak on his body. He tilted his head to look at Feng Jiao next to him. Feng Jiao had already slowly walked back to his bed and was facing the wall on the other side, ignoring him. It was the middle of March. Even outside, one could feel a bit of coldness, much less in the dark dungeon. As soon as the cloak was on his body, the coldness that had been on his body dissipated greatly. Feng Huiting silently gathered the cloak around his body and looked at the man in the thin red robe across from him. His eyes revealed a rare softness. Feng Jiao was a martial artist and had been on the battlefield for many years. Naturally, he could feel the gaze on his body. He originally wanted to ignore it in a fit of pique, but the gaze didn't move from his body, making him gradually feel uncomfortable. He suddenly turned around and said unhappily, "If you have something to say, just say it." Without waiting for Feng Huiting to speak, Feng Jiao continued, "You don't need to think too much. This time, you were implicated by me. Don't worry, I will guarantee that the Feng family will walk out of prison safely." "What did you do?" After a long silence, Feng Huiting asked in a deep voice. Feng Jiao squeezed out a strange smile and looked at Feng Huiting with a trace of deliberate malice. "I kidnapped someone from the palace." As the head of the Feng family, Feng Huiting naturally had his own channels of information. Even if someone in the palace went missing, he would still know a thing or two. Hearing Feng Jiao's words, his expression couldn't help but change slightly. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, "After so many years, you still can't let it go." This time, it was Feng Jiao's turn to be stunned. He really didn't expect Feng Huiting to know his thoughts back then. He looked at the man across from him with a somewhat complicated expression. After a long while, he anxiously growled, "This has nothing to do with you." The empty cell suddenly fell silent. It was so quiet that it was as if the two people's breathing could be heard. After a long while, Feng Huiting said, "You are so daring because you have Prince Ding's support? If Prince Ding is unwilling or can't help you, what will you do?" Feng Jiao was stunned for a moment, then sneered, "Isn't it a bit late to teach me a lesson now?" Feng Jiao did feel very guilty for acting impulsively this time, but when faced with Feng Huiting's cold expression and tone, he couldn't calm down and speak properly. Feng Huiting calmly looked at him for a long time, then finally sighed softly and didn't say anything more. Feng Jiao stared blankly at Feng Huiting, who closed his eyes and didn't speak anymore. His heart was filled with mixed feelings, and he didn't know what to think. Chapter 615. In the Prime Minister's mansion. In the study, Prime Minister Liu looked at his daughter, who was sitting on the side with an indifferent look, and frowned. He walked back and forth in the study room with his hands behind his back. After a while, he turned around and stared at noble concubine Lu. Daughter, what do you want? Noble concubine Lu raised her head and said unhappily, What? Prime Minister Lu said angrily, What? Why do you ask? We had a good discussion before. Why do you want to mess with Imo Xiuyao at this time? Noble concubine Lu frowned slightly. How did I mess with Imo Xiuyao? Prime Minister Lu had a headache. It was good to have a smart, beautiful, and spoiled daughter, but it was a headache to have a disobedient daughter. Rubbing his forehead, Prime Minister Lu took a deep breath and said calmly, We had a deal. First, we will deal with the matter of the burial. Now that this matter hasn't been resolved and you've provoked Imo Xiuyao, if he suddenly interferes, you have to know that Father and Prince Li are still suppressing this matter under the pressure of those scholars and old pedants. As long as Prince Ding says something, those people will make trouble again. Noble concubine Lu supported her head with her hands and looked at Prime Minister Lu indifferently. What do you want? No matter what, you should let Feng Jiao go first. He is Imo Xiuyao's man. Since Imo Xiuyao has said that he has no intention of interfering in the affairs in the capital, we should not mess with him for the time being. Noble concubine Lu said unhappily. Prince Ding took Tan Jiji away. Father, don't you know what Feng Jiao did? No matter what he did, Prime Minister Lu said firmly, he took the Empress away, so what? It is not bad for us. If the Empress is still alive, she will be the Empress Dowager when the new emperor ascends the throne. At that time, the Hua family will be able to help the new emperor openly. Isn't it good now? The new emperor is still young. If his birth mother dies early, then as the previous emperor's imperial concubine, you will naturally be the most powerful person in the palace. What's more, Hua clan has such a weakness in our hands. By then, Prime Minister Lu showed a smug smile when he thought of the situation where Hua clan was under the foot of Lu clan, or even under the control of Lu clan. Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes, and a trace of disdain flashed across her eyes. The most powerful person in the palace? So what? Even if it was the position of Empress Dowager, if she didn't have that person, what was the use of those noble positions? Prime Minister Lu turned around and saw the sneer and disdain on noble concubine Lu's lips. He frowned and asked, Haven't you given up on Prince Ding? Seeing noble concubine Lu's determined eyes, Prime Minister Lu felt extremely uncomfortable. He was about to spit out a mouthful of blood in his chest. What sin had he committed to have such a disappointing daughter? What a sin! It has been so many years. If Prince Ding likes you, he wouldn't have waited until now. Why are you still? Prime Minister Lu tried his best to persuade her. Shut up. What Prime Minister Lu said really touched noble concubine Lu's bottom line. Her delicate face was instantly covered with a layer of anger. Noble concubine Lu glared at her father in front of her. She gritted her teeth and said, I don't believe it. He doesn't dislike me. He just didn't kill me. Prime Minister Lu didn't know what to say at that moment. Prime Minister Lu didn't know what to say. He really didn't understand where the Lu family's education had failed to raise such a stubborn daughter. A woman in her 30s would be a grandmother in an ordinary family. Even if she didn't enter the palace, she should be a lady in charge of a noble family. How could a woman at her age care about a man wholeheartedly? And a man who didn't care about her at all?
Sin.
Prime Minister Lu sighed and stamped his feet. Noble concubine Lu didn't care about her father's anxiety. She showed a faint but sweet smile. Yes, that's right. He just didn't see me. Tomorrow, I will go to the Prince Ding mansion to see him. He will definitely understand how I feel about him. Are you sure he won't kick you out? Prime Minister Lu poured cold water on her mercilessly. Noble concubine Lu caught Prince Ding's people. The most likely reaction of Prince Ding was to detain noble concubine Lu as well. At that time, they would still have to exchange people for her. Maybe they would have to pay a higher price. Prime Minister Lu didn't think that Imo Xiuyao would pay a high price for Feng Jiao. After all, Feng Jiao was just a subordinate. If Prince Ding got angry because of this, it would be more likely that his dignity was challenged. Prime Minister Lu really couldn't admit that this daughter was taught by him. Noble concubine Lu smiled confidently. No, Unless he doesn't want Feng San to die. Prime Minister Lu sneered. Why are you going to see him? Do you want him to marry you? Don't tell me you don't know that Prince Ding loves the princess deeply. For so many years, he only has Princess Ding by his side. Do you think Prince Ding will betray his wife for Feng San? Not only that, Prime Minister Lu was also a man. From a man's point of view, it was absolutely impossible for him to abandon Princess Ding, who was also outstanding in appearance and ability and had been in the same boat with him, for a woman who had been married and had given birth to another man's child, even if that woman was as beautiful as a fairy. Abandoning his wife for pure beauty was a despicable thing to do. Prime Minister Lu wasn't a good man, but he wasn't despicable either. How could Prince Ding do something that even he disdained to do? Noble concubine Lu looked at Prime Minister Lu strangely. Father, I really don't understand. Don't you know that both the new emperor and Mo Jingli are far inferior to Prince Ding? As long as Mo Shuyao wants, he can get as much as the Dechu state. If I get better, the Lu family will get better. Why are you so against it? Prime Minister Lu bitterly smiled in his heart, but once again confirmed that he had failed to educate his daughter. It seemed that it was time to give up. Fortunately, 2 of his granddaughters were about to reach marriageable age. Although they weren't as beautiful and talented as his daughter, they were still excellent. King Li and King Qin had to be careful. As for Prince Ding, sorry, Prime Minister Lu had never considered the possibility of relying on Prince Ding. Not only because of the dirty relationship between the Lu family and the Prince Ding mansion, but also because Mo Xiuyao's behavior was completely different from the Lu family's. Even if Prince Ding really married noble concubine Lu, the Lu family wouldn't get any benefits from it. Helplessly waving his hand, Prime Minister Lu said blandly, "All right, since you don't want to listen to me, then do whatever you want. But I just hope that you won't bring trouble to the Lu family. In the future, you don't have to come back. After all, you are a concubine of the late emperor. It's not appropriate for you to always go out of the palace." Noble concubine Lu paused, looking at Prime Minister Lu confusedly. For so many years, her father had never talked to her in this tone. It wasn't anger or coldness, but a faint disheartened and alienated feeling. Instinctively, noble concubine Lu didn't like this feeling. "Father, all right, you can go now." "Oh, right, I plan to marry Xian to King Li," Prime Minister Lu told her his plan. Chapter 616. Noble consort Lu was stunned for a while, then she got up and walked out slowly. She was not stupid. She knew what her father meant. It meant that the Lu family would bet on Prince Li. The Lu family had decided to give up on her and the Prince of Qin. At least, the Prince of Qin would not be the most important person to the Lu family in the future. In this life, other than being rejected by Mo Shuyao, noble consort Lu's life had always been smooth sailing. She had never thought that one day she would be abandoned by someone. Father, why can't you understand me? I am doing this for my own happiness. Is there anything wrong with that? Father, since you are so heartless, don't blame me for being unjust." Looking back, noble consort Lu glanced at Prime Minister Lu, who was thinking with his head lowered in the study. A trace of hatred flashed across her face, and she walked forward steadily. In the dark cell at night, Feng Xiao, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. He looked sideways at Feng Huiding, who was sleeping on the bed with a cloak not far away. A trace of worry flashed across his eyes. "Zhuijing." Feng Xiao looked at the door of the cell and asked tentatively. A deep laugh came from the door of the cell. Qin Feng appeared at the door of the cell and looked at him leisurely. He teased, "It's not Zhuijing. But Zhuijing asked me to tell you something." "What is it?" Feng Xiao raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why are you here?" He remembered that Qin Feng did not come to the capital with them. Qin Feng walked into the dungeon and said with a smile. Zhuijing said, "Prince is very angry. As for why I am here, it's a coincidence. As soon as I came to the capital, I heard that young Master Feng San was caught by a woman. So I came to visit him. After all, compared with Zhuijing, we are colleagues, aren't we?" It's an accident. Hearing that the prince was very angry, Feng Xiao shrank his neck out of habit and said calmly, "This was really an accident. How could he have known that the woman would run to the Supreme Court at that time?" Noble consort Lu was a woman who had lost her mind for the prince. She wasn't Mo Jingli. If he dared to run, noble consort Lu would really dare to kill Feng Huiting. Although he hated Feng Huiting for neglecting him, it wasn't to the point where he wanted him dead. Qin Feng tilted his head and smiled at the person in the cell next to him. "Uncle, I'm Qin Feng. He's Feng San's friend. How's Uncle?" Feng Huiting, who was in the cell next door, woke up as soon as they spoke. A place like a cell wasn't a place where people could sleep soundly. Feng Huiting was startled, but he nodded and said, "This old man is fine. Many thanks, young Master Qin." Qin Feng waved his hand and said, "This time, it's Feng San's fault for being impulsive. When we return, our prince will teach him a lesson. Uncle, let's go now." Feng Huiting's expression was complicated, and there was a hint of bitterness on his lips. His son was impulsive, but he needed someone else to teach him a lesson and apologize to him, his father. For the first time in his life, Feng Huiting felt that perhaps he had really done something wrong to his son. Qin Feng walked up and casually pulled out a dagger that was shining with cold light. With a casual slash, the finger-thick iron chain and the huge copper lock on the cell were cut off. Qin Feng reached out and caught it, then threw it back and opened the cell door. Qin Feng stood at the door of the cell and looked at Feng Huiting with a smile. "Uncle, please." Seeing that Feng Huiting was still hesitating, Qin Feng smiled and said, "Uncle, don't worry. Although the other members of the Feng family are in Prince Li's hands, he won't hurt them." However, the Feng family's property was in doubt. It was a pity that they had made a lot of money in shilling last year. Prince Ding, who was already rich, didn't lack money. In any case, it was the property of the Feng family, so they were a little embarrassed to take it. Otherwise, they could also have a share. Only then did Feng Huiting walk out. He looked at Qin Feng and said, "Prince Ding's subordinates are indeed crouching tigers and hidden dragons." Qin Feng smiled faintly. He casually played with the dagger in his hand and said, "It's just a small trick. I've embarrassed myself in front of Uncle. Uncle, please. Our people will be waiting outside." Feng Huiting thanked him. He glanced at Feng Xiao and walked out the door. Qin Feng smiled at Feng Xiao and followed. Feng Xiao, who was still in the cell, was dumbfounded. "Qin Feng, I haven't come out yet." Qin Feng looked at the sky innocently.
What?
"The order I received was to save Master Feng, who is implicated by the subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion. Who else is there?" "I didn't hear anything." "You?" Feng Xiao gritted his teeth. Qin Feng smiled very happily. "Feng San, you should obediently continue to stay in prison. Maybe by the time you come out, Prince's anger will have subsided. Also, don't tell me you can't break a small iron chain. Oh, and Prince Ding Mansion has ordered that since you like to stay in prison so much, you can stay there for 2 more days. Don't worry, that woman definitely won't kill you for the sake of the prince. Just you wait." Feng Xiao glared angrily at the person who left. He knew that Mo Xiao wouldn't do this just to punish him. However, when he thought of Qin Feng's smug and mocking expression, he couldn't help but curse in his heart with resentment. This young master curses your love life to be bumpy. Qin Feng, who had just walked out of the secret cell, shivered for no reason. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The weather in March was indeed a bit cold. Qin Feng brought Feng Huiting out. They didn't encounter any obstructions along the way. Seeing the powerful subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion, Feng Huiting's heart wavered, and he pondered deeply. When they returned to the Prince Ding mansion, the sky was already slightly bright. Feng Huiting was familiarized with the place. After eating a bit of breakfast, he was brought to see Mo Xiaoyao and Yili. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili weren't in the study. Instead, they were in a quiet little garden in the depths of the Prince Ding mansion. When Feng Huiting was brought over, Mo Xiaoyao was practicing his swordsmanship. Not far away, Yili and the Empress were sitting at a stone table and talking. Not far from the table, two children were squatting on the ground with their heads together. It was unknown what they were talking about. The first rays of the morning sun shone in the courtyard. The faint fragrance of orchids filled one's nose, making one feel relaxed and happy. "It's old Master Feng? Come and sit." Yili was the first to notice Feng Whiting. She turned around and spoke with a smile. Feng Whiting walked forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Greetings to Princess Ding. Greetings to Empress Nyang Nyang." Almost instantly, the Empress clearly sensed that Feng Whiting was criticizing her. She smiled faintly and didn't speak. She was only a guest right now, so she naturally couldn't steal the limelight. Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. If the Empress could sense it, she would naturally be able to. Mo Xiaoyao had dragged the Empress to see Feng Xiao together. She didn't know if Feng Xiao would blame them in the future. However, Yili understood Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts. If the Empress was going to be with Feng Xiao in the future, then Feng Whiting was a hurdle they had to pass. If Feng Xiao really didn't care about Feng Whiting, or if Feng Whiting didn't care about Feng Xiao at all, then it wasn't a big deal. However, Feng Xiao's behavior clearly wasn't the case. The reason why Feng Whiting was hostile to the Empress was naturally because of Feng Xiao. "Old Master Feng, please sit." Feng San's impulsive actions have implicated the Feng family. Please don't blame him, Old Master Feng. Hearing this, Feng Whiting smiled bitterly. Wang Fei is too serious. This old man is ashamed. If he hadn't neglected his son, and neglected to teach him, Feng Xiao might not have cared so much about the Empress, and even impulsively barged into the palace to kidnap her. He also knew how much the Empress cared for Feng Xiao in the past, so even so, he didn't have the face to blame the Empress. Looking at the white-clothed child who shyly jumped into Princess Ding's arms, and the black-clothed boy who walked over with a solemn expression and climbed onto a stool to sit properly, a trace of regret flashed through Feng Whiting's eyes. If Xiao's child might have already been older than these two children. To the side, Mo Xiaoyao stopped his sword and casually threw it back into the scabbard hanging from a nearby tree before walking over. Yili casually handed over her handkerchief. Mo Xiaoyao took it and wiped his forehead that barely had any sweat before sitting down next to Yili Prince. Feng Whiting wanted to get up, but Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand to indicate for him to sit down. No need to be so courteous. This time it was all Feng San's fault. Old Master Feng didn't suffer much, right? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Feng Whiting felt a bit uncomfortable. This was already the third person to say this to him. This meant that the people of the Prince Ding mansion truly treated Feng Xiao as a family member and not a simple subordinate. But at the same time, this was the greatest insult to him as a father. But at this time, Feng Whiting wasn't in the mood to care about this. He worriedly asked Prince Xiao. He knew that Feng Xiao hadn't followed them out of the dungeon, even though Qin Feng had told him that Feng Xiao had another mission. Mo Xiaoyao casually brushed aside his white hair that was blown up by the breeze. His lips curled into a faint smile. Old Master Feng, don't worry. Feng San will be back today. But with his temperament, it's good for him to be taught a lesson so that he won't be hot-headed in the future. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao say this, Feng Whiting felt a bit apprehensive, but he could only let it go. At the very least, he believed that Prince Ding wouldn't let Feng Xiao's life be in danger. He cupped his hands towards Mo Xiaoyao and said, "This one thanks Prince for your help. If there's anything this one can do in the future, Prince, please don't hesitate to tell me." Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Old Master Feng, there's no need to be so polite. It was just a small matter. It's just that. ? Feng Whiting calmly waited for Mo Xiaoyao's words. The Feng family's business is most likely. As far as I know, your two sons have already sided with Prince Li. Before you came back, I received news that the Feng family has already been released. The price is 70% of the Feng family's business." Mo Xiaoyao picked up his teacup and took a sip as he spoke calmly. Chapter 617. What? These two bastards. Feng Huiting gritted his teeth in anger. The reason why the Feng family was loyal to Mo Jingqi was not without reason. Back then, the Feng family almost experienced a disaster. At that time, it was Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince, who helped. No matter how much people criticized Mo Jingqi's character, he had truly saved the Feng family and its huge foundation. It was because of this that Feng Huiting drove out Feng Jiao, who was close to Prince Ding. It was not only because he was afraid of being suspected by the royal family. The Feng family clearly knew that Mo Jingli was harmed by him, but they still relied on him. Although Feng Huiting was a businessman, he still maintained some integrity. In the eyes of Feng Huiting, this was ungrateful behavior. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the silent empress with a faint smile and said, "Master Feng, you don't need to be angry. Speaking of which, your son is just thinking about the lives of the Feng family." Of course, he added fuel to the fire. He did not feel regret handing over more than half of the Feng family to Mo Jingli. Money could be earned at any time, but the people who earned money, the two legitimate sons of the Feng family, were enough. The one who was truly capable was the one in front of him. The Feng family only had its current power and wealth in his hands. Prince Ding's residence had a wide variety of businesses, and there were countless of them. He could no longer trust Han Mingyue. Han Mingxi and Leng Haoyu were gradually struggling to cope. Moreover, the development of the Northwest had gradually begun to reach a bottleneck. He needed business geniuses very much.
So, what was a Feng family?
With enough talents, he would soon have 2, 3, or even 10 Feng families. Although the Mo family was not good at business, they never lacked money because they were better at using others to make money. Feng Huiting was able to make the Feng family flourish in his hands. Naturally, he was not stupid. He smiled helplessly and said, "I'm afraid that Prince Li has long set his eyes on the Feng family's businesses." Many people knew that the Feng family was the late emperor's people. Although Mo Jingli was not as suspicious as Mo Jingqi, he would never be at ease letting the Feng family out of his control. Not to mention the Feng family's coveted wealth. Rather than saying that the matter this time was caused by Feng Zhiyao, it was better to say that it was brought about by the Feng family's wealth. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and did not answer. He liked to talk to smart people. "Prince, noble consort Lu wants to see you." At the crescent door, Zhuijing reported. Mo Xiaoyao smiled at Feng Huiting and said, "Aren't we here now?" "Is Feng San is here?" Zhua. "What's wrong with him?" the two voices asked in unison. Before they could finish speaking, the two of them looked at each other with awkward expressions. Yili smiled and patted the back of the Empress' hand. "Zhuijing, if you say so, it should not be a big problem." But it was inevitable to suffer a little. Yili, of course, would not say that Mo Xiaoyao sent Qin Feng to take Feng Huiting away in advance to deal with Feng Jiao. This time, Feng Jiao caused a lot of trouble, which made Prince Ding very unhappy. If Feng San had told Mo Xiaoyao in advance, Missouri Xiaoyao would have just had to move his mouth. But now so many things happened. Of course, the prince was unhappy. "Let's go. Let's see how daring noble consort Lu is to dare to detain I's people." Everyone present, except for Yi Li and Mo Xiaobao, couldn't help but tremble at the coldness in his voice. Even the youngest, Leng Junhan, cleverly hid her little head in Yi Li's arms. Yi Li picked up Leng Junhan and stood up. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the little brat in his wife's arms. He snorted and reached out to pick him up. Leng Junhan hung in the air and stared blankly at a certain white-haired person. She pouted and reached out her little hand to Yi Li, and hug. On the side, Zhuijing looked at the little dumpling in Mo Xiaoyao's arms with admiration. Who said that Leng Haoyu's son was timid? He clearly had the guts of a leopard. Mo Xiaobao also wiped his sweat. Little dummy Leng wouldn't be killed by his father, right? This was the first subordinate he planned to have in the future. In the main hall of Prince Ding Mansion, noble consort Lu sat on a carved sandalwood chair, deep in thought. Opposite her, the handsome young Master Feng San was tied up and thrown into a chair. Behind Feng Jiao stood two tall men, one on the left and one on the right. Their eyes were reserved, and the meridians in front of their temples bulged slightly. It was obvious that they were internal experts. Originally, noble consort Lu would never bring Feng Jiao to the Prince Ding mansion. After all, Feng Jiao was one of her bargaining chips. But when she arrived at the Prince Ding mansion, she realized that without Feng Jiao, she couldn't enter the Prince Ding mansion at all. Feng Jiao leaned back in the chair. Being tied up like a dumpling made him very uncomfortable. Also, his body was whipped a few times, and it was burning with pain. Feng Jiao, who hadn't been injured for a long time, couldn't help cursing in his heart. The way he stared at noble consort Lu became even more vicious. He must kill this woman. After waiting for a long time, she didn't see Mo Xiaoyao come, and no one came to serve her tea. Noble consort Lu was not in the mood to criticize the hospitality of the Prince Ding mansion. Her delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if she was thinking about something important. Prince, princess. Outside the door came the sound of the guards and maids saluting. Noble consort Lu raised her head. Her eyes brightened, and her hands in her sleeves clenched tightly. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li came in side by side. Mo Xiaoyao was holding a pink boy in white clothes. Beside Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li was the young master of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaobao, who made noble consort Lu gnash her teeth in hatred. Seeing noble consort Lu, Mo Xiaobao's eyes brightened. Noble consort Lu suddenly had a bad feeling. Before she could say anything, Mo Xiaobao said cheerfully, "Auntie, why are you here again?"
Auntie?
Lung Junhan tilted her head and looked at noble consort Lu curiously. She blinked her eyes in confusion. This Annie was very beautiful. She didn't look like the old auntie in the mansion at all. Idiot, little dummy Lung. The old auntie in the mansion is called Mama. This one is called Annie. Mo Xiaobao said disdainfully. Obviously, little dummy Lung accidentally asked her question. Hearing Mo Xiaobao's nondescript explanation and looking at noble consort Lu's expression, Yi Li couldn't help laughing secretly. Perhaps it was because Mo Xiaoyao had suppressed him too much, but Mo Xiaobao's ability to spout nonsense improved by leaps and bounds. Now, even Yi Li couldn't tell if he was being serious or purposely trying to anger her.
Prince Ding.
Noble consort Lu's face darkened. If he kept talking, she was afraid that she really couldn't help but beat the little guy. Mo Xiaoyao stepped into the hall indifferently. He put Lung Junhan on the chair beside Feng Jiao, glanced at the two people standing behind Feng Jiao, and said, "Get out." The two people moved, but found in horror that they couldn't move at all. They couldn't even move a finger, let alone do anything to Feng Jiao or the child who was looking at them curiously in the chair. They seemed to be stiff all of a sudden. Obviously, Prince Ding's skills were much higher than what they had imagined. Was this the strength of one of the four great masters? Sweat oozed from the two people's foreheads silently, as if it was raining. Chapter 618. Mo Xiaoyao snorted. He turned around and pulled Yi Li to the main seat. After Mo Xiaoyao walked a few steps away, the two men heaved a sigh of relief. When they found that they could move, they fell to the ground. Before noble consort Lu said anything, they rolled and crawled out. Lung Junan sat in the chair and waved at Mo Xiaobao cheerfully. After receiving Mo Xiaobao's disdainful eye roll, she didn't care and curiously poked Feng Jiao, who was tightly tied up beside her. "Hey, Uncle Feng, what's wrong with you?" Feng Jiao smiled bitterly and looked at Yi Li for help. He didn't dare to ask Mo Xiaoyao for help. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to be untied by Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. She raised her finger, and a silver light shot out of it. Feng Jiao felt cold on his arm. The rope that tied him up loosened immediately. Looking back at the silver blade that was stuck in the wall, Feng Jiao felt his hair stand on end. Well, he couldn't afford to offend her either. "Feng-san, are you okay?" Yi Li looked at Feng Jiao's clothes that were torn by the whip and stained with blood. "I'm fine." Feng Jiao shook his head. In fact, he was just whipped a few times. For someone like Feng Jiao, who had been on the battlefield, it wasn't even a small wound. It was just a loss of face. Prince Ding, Noble consort Lu frowned and said anxiously. Mo Xiuyao raised his hand to stop her, but the words that came out of his beautiful thin lips made noble consort Lu feel cold all over. Take her out and whip her 10 times before she speaks. Mo Xiuyao saw the scars on Feng Jiao's body as soon as they met. Prince Ding, you? Noble consort Lu's face turned pale. What did you say? Mo Xiuyao said indifferently. Feng Sam belongs to the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he made a big mistake, the Prince Ding mansion should take responsibility for it. Since when was it up to you, a mere concubine of the inner palace, to decide? I don't care what you want to say. You have to take the whip. The guard outside the door heard the order and came in immediately. He walked to noble consort Lu without hesitation. The current noble consort couldn't be whipped? The consequences were serious? The consequences would be more serious if the prince got angry. These days, the prince was in a bad mood. Stop. Noble consort Lu shouted harshly. You can't touch me. I'm the current noble consort. Mo Xiuyao pouted in disdain. You're the late emperor's concubine. So, what if I whipped you? Who dared to save you? Your father? Mo? Or your father? I have something to tell you. It's something good for the Prince Ding mansion. You'll regret it if you don't listen. Noble consort Lu bit her lips, which were trembling because of fear, and said anxiously, Take her away. Don't make I say it again. Mo Xiuyao said coldly. The 2 guards neatly dragged noble consort Lu out of the room, one on the left and one on the right. Noble consort Lu only knew a little martial arts. How could she defeat the 2 guards? She was dragged away almost without any resistance. After a while, the sound of a whip breaking through the air came from outside the door. Mo Xiaobao opened his eyes curiously. Why didn't she scream? Yi Li covered her face. Was it really okay to block the 2 children? Most importantly, why was Mo Xiaobao not only poking his head out fearlessly, but also Lung Junhan, who had always been obedient, opened her eyes wide with curiosity and excitement? Was there really a problem with the way she raised the children? When Lung Haoyu and Morong Ting came back, how was she going to explain that their obedient son had become so cruel? 10 lashes were actually very fast. In less than half an hour, noble consort Lu was dragged back and put back in the chair she was sitting in. But this time, her white clothes were stained with bright red blood. Noble consort Lu could no longer maintain her graceful sitting posture. She could only lie on the chair weakly. She looked much more miserable than Feng Jiao. Feng Jiao looked at noble consort Lu, who was even more miserable than him, with a happy face. He suddenly felt that the wounds on his body were not so painful. However, when he met Mo Xiuyao's half-smiling eyes, Feng Jiao immediately shrank back, without the courage to do so. He was still more miserable than noble consort Lu. He could foresee that the future waiting for him would definitely be full of disasters. Now, you can say it. Mo Xiuyao seemed to be in a better mood. He took a sip of tea and said, Noble consort Lu was trembling in pain. How could she say anything else? She and Feng Jiao, who was thick-skinned, didn't feel any pain. Moreover, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion didn't mean to go easy on her at all. She could still sit here now because the people who beat her knew that she had to talk to the prince after the beating, so they were a little merciful. Noble consort Lu gasped. She looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was holding a teacup and handing it to Yi Li, who was sitting next to him, with a smile in his eyes. Even when he was talking to her, he didn't look at her at all. She couldn't help but feel cold all over. You are so cruel, Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows. I didn't come here to listen to your nonsense. After suffering so much, if noble consort Lu still didn't know that the previous method didn't work on Mo Xiuyao, then she really lived for decades in vain. Clenching her teeth, noble consort Lu said, I can help you take down the 3 prefectures in the north of Dechu State and the northern tribes without any effort.
Oh?
Mo Xiuyao glanced sideways at her and looked at her suspiciously. Seeing this, noble consort Lu knew that Mo Xiuyao was interested. She was delighted and said in a low voice, But I have a condition. Mo Xiuyao leaned back slightly and leaned on Yi Li. He asked. Let's hear it. I want you to marry me as your concubine. Puff. Feng Xiao coughed again and again. He looked at the woman in front of him with resentment. He hadn't drunk a mouthful of water for a day and a night. This woman actually made him choke. Yili couldn't help but fall back. Emo Xiaoyao, who was leaning on her, could only sit up and turn around to hold her slender waist and pull her close. Lili? Yili smiled apologetically. She wasn't angry or didn't trust Emo Xiaoyao. She was just frightened by noble consort Lu. She had just been whipped 10 times by Emo Xiaoyao, yet she was still so infatuated that she wanted to marry him. Wasn't she afraid that Emo Xiaoyao would kill her after using her? Wasn't she asking for it? The reason why noble consort Lu didn't love Emo Jingqi was probably because Emo Jingqi was too good to her. Seeing Yili's smile, Emo Xiaoyao rubbed against her with satisfaction. Lili, what do you say? Yili raised her eyebrows. Shouldn't he solve this problem himself? What did he mean by pushing it to her? Shouldn't the princess have the final say in taking a concubine? Emo Xiaoyao asked innocently. Taking a concubine? Yili narrowed her eyes. Her voice was calm and contained a smile. Prince wants to take a concubine? I am a good husband. My beloved concubine has the final say in matters of the inner residence, Emo Xiaoyao said generously. Prince Ding, I'm not talking about taking a concubine. Noble consort Lu's face was livid. I want you to marry me, as an equal concubine. Originally, she wanted to say the official concubine, but seeing Prince Ding's attitude towards Yili, she knew it was impossible. Noble consort Lu decided to take a step back. As long as she became Prince Ding's concubine then, Feng Xiao sneered. Noble consort Lu, don't tell me you don't know? This equal concubine to the official concubine is the same as noble consort to the empress. They're both concubines. Noble consort Lu's eyes sharpened. She stared at Feng Xiao fiercely. Feng-san, shut your stinky mouth. Otherwise, I will ruin your reputation with her. Feng Xiao raised his eyebrows. Ruin my reputation? Just like you, noble consort Lu? You personally went to the prince's house to force him to take you as a concubine?
Let me think.
You used the land of the 3 prefectures in the north of Dechu state as a bargaining chip. What's this called again, treason? Noble consort Lu trembled with anger. She wanted to get up, but the pain in her body made her unable to move. She took a few deep breaths to suppress the anger in her heart. She looked at Emo Xiaoyao and said, Prince Ding, what do you think? Emo Xiaoyao said calmly, I never care about matters of the inner residence. Feng Xiao snickered. What an interesting way to put it. Did the Prince Ding mansion have matters of the inner residence? Noble consort Lu thought she understood what Emo Xiaoyao meant. It was up to Yili to decide whether to marry her or not. This made noble consort Lu very unhappy. But since Emo Xiaoyao said so, noble consort Lu could only comfort herself that it was because of Prince Ding of the Su family that he gave face to Yili. She raised her chin slightly and looked at Yili proudly. Miss Yi, you must know that I have benefits for the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army, right? Yili raised her eyebrows and stopped Emo Xiaobao, who wanted to jump up. She smiled faintly and said, with noble consort Lu's brain, you can't think of such a thing, right? Let me guess whose idea it was? Tanjiji? Looking at noble consort Lu's gloomy face, Yili smiled faintly and said, Tanjiji is now in the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. Does noble consort Lu think it's interesting to use this to negotiate? But I still have to thank noble consort Lu for providing such interesting information. In addition, seeing that noble consort Lu wanted to interrupt, Yili lowered her voice and said, the 3 states that noble consort Lu mentioned are all connected to the northern tribes. The border is thousands of miles long. Once the Mahist army takes over, they will have to face the attack of the northern tribes and the condemnation of the people of the Dechu state. Noble consort Lu, do you want to help the Prince Ding mansion or do you want to harm the Prince Ding mansion? Noble consort Lu opened her mouth but didn't say anything. She really didn't understand these things. She just thought about it after listening to Tanjiji's analysis. You're talking nonsense. Why would the Mahist army be afraid of the northern tribes and a group of common people? Noble consort Lu said with a pale face. Yi Li smiled and didn't say anything else. It was a waste of time to talk about the people's hearts with this woman who was crazy for a man and didn't care about anything else. Raising her hand and gently twirling the hair around her ear, Yi Li looked at noble consort Lu and said faintly, "It seems that noble consort Lu can't come up with any constructive ideas. Then please go back. If you don't have the ability, don't think about other people's men. If you really need something, there's a Qingfeng restaurant in the west of the city." Cough, cough, cough. Feng Jiao put down the teacup with a twisted face and looked at Yi Li with a frightened face. Qingfeng restaurant. That's a men's restaurant, right? How did you know, princess consort? Chapter 619. Noble consort Lu's face suddenly became ferocious and ugly. Although she didn't know what the so-called cool breeze mansion was, it didn't prevent her from understanding the meaning of Yi Kai's words. She dared to compare her with those lustful sluts.
How dare she?
Yi Li, you bitch. Before noble consort Lu could finish her words, she heard a bang. The woman in white, who was already covered in blood, flew out immediately. She crashed out of the hall and fell on the bluestone ground in the garden outside the door. He didn't show any mercy this time. Noble consort Lu fell on the ground and made a loud noise. The guards outside the door looked down, but they couldn't help but feel jealous. Did they just hear the sound of bones breaking? Noble consort Lu spat out a mouthful of blood as soon as she landed. She opened her cold eyes widely and stared at the man in white who strolled out from inside, as if she had never known this person. Immerse Xiaoyao walked up to her and looked down at the embarrassed woman on the ground, but there was no pity or emotion in his eyes. Who dared to curse her? Immerse Xiaoyao's words were as cold as ice, which made noble consort Lu tremble in pain. Immerse Xiaoyao, you are so cruel. Noble consort Lu forced herself to sit up with one hand, and the other hand was strangely hanging on one side. Obviously, the arm that hit the ground first was fractured. Immerse Xiaoyao frowned slightly. Looking at the woman in front of him, whose eyes were full of hatred, he felt ridiculous. Do you think that because you helped I once or twice, I will be kind to you? And even let you humiliate Ai's wife? The Prince Ding mansion didn't owe her anything. Noble consort Lu did help him back then, but the Prince Ding mansion also repaid her. They just took what they needed.
It was funny to talk about this now.
That woman. Is that woman so important to you? For her you would even give up the north, which is so easy to get. Noble consort Lu struggled to ask. Immerse Xiaoyao sneered. Was Mr. Li not clear enough? What's more for her? Not to mention what I haven't gotten, even if it's the entire world. I can give it up. You! Noble concubine Lu stared at the man in white in front of her in shock. Immerse Xiaoyao snorted, as if he was fed up with the blood-stained woman in front of him. He waved his hand and ordered the guards beside him, "Throw her out." "Yes, Prince." The guard standing by the side didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly came forward and pulled noble consort Lu out. Concubine Lu was severely injured and couldn't move. She could only turn around and stare at Immerse Xiaoyao with hatred. "Immerse Xiaoyao, you will regret this." Immerse Xiaoyao smiled coldly and ignored her. Noble consort Lu was dragged out of the Prince Ding mansion and thrown out without hesitation. She fell on the ground under the steps of the Prince Ding mansion. The heavy impact made her groan. Obviously, she was injured again. The people who came to the Prince Ding mansion with her hurriedly rushed over and tried to help her up. A few of them helped her up, which made her feel so painful that she wanted to die. She couldn't help but shout angrily, "Get out of my way." Everyone was shocked. They didn't understand how noble consort Lu could be injured like this after a trip to the Prince Ding mansion. Fortunately, the Prince Ding mansion was located in the area where the nobles of the Chu capital lived. At this time, there weren't many people on the street. Otherwise, the royal family's reputation would be completely lost. Noble consort Lu struggled to stand up from the ground with difficulty. She was stunned. At the corner of the street not far away, a 12 or 13-year-old young man in brocade clothes was looking at her silently with a gloomy face. "Noble consort, it's the king of Qin," the maid beside her reminded her in a low voice. "My son." Noble consort Lu called him softly. The king of Qin looked at noble consort Lu silently for a while. Then he turned around and disappeared at the corner of the street. Noble consort Lu looked at the empty street in a daze. An inexplicable uneasiness quietly spread in her heart. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Feng Huiting and the Empress were shocked when they saw Feng Jiao's appearance, but no one asked. Seeing the strange atmosphere, Yili had to ask herself, "Feng San, are you okay?" Feng Jiao looked at Yili gratefully and said with a smile, "Thank you for your concern, princess. It's just a superficial wound. It's not a big deal." On the side, Feng Huiting and the Empress secretly let out a sigh of relief. Mo Xiuyao sat on the side and casually tapped the armrest of the chair with his fingers. He looked at Feng Jiao with a faint smile and said, "Feng San, do you have anything to say?" Feng Jiao's face immediately fell. He said with a bitter face, "I'll accept any punishment from the prince." "Very good." Mo Xiuyao clapped and said with a smile, "Since you accept the punishment, then how about going to Qin Feng's place to receive your punishment? I don't want to see you for the next few months." Feng Jiao widened his eyes in surprise. For a moment, he didn't understand what the prince was thinking. Going to Qin Feng's place to receive his punishment? Qin Feng didn't seem to have this function, did he? Most importantly, Mo Xiuyao was actually willing to not enslave him for a few months? His surprise was seen by the other two people who didn't know the situation. They thought that Mo Xiuyao's punishment was very severe. Their expressions were a bit unsightly. After a long while, Feng Jiao nervously accepted Mo Xiuyao's order. This subordinate obeys. No matter how Mo Xiuyao wanted to torment him, he couldn't escape. He might as well face it calmly. "Prince!" Two figures called out at the same time. Feng Huiting and the Empress couldn't help but look at each other. In the end, it was Feng Huiting who spoke. "Prince, this time, it was all because of this old man. I ask that the prince give this old man some face and be lenient." Feng Jiao looked at Feng Huiting with surprise. His face was calm, but his brows were slightly furrowed. He obviously didn't expect Feng Huiting to plead for him. Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, "Master Feng is too serious. This matter was caused by Feng San. How can Master Feng be blamed? Moreover, I have always been clear about rewards and punishments. Feng San has caused such a big matter. If I don't punish him, how can I convince the public?" Feng Huiting was also a person of authority. He naturally knew the importance of being clear about rewards and punishments. However, Mo Xiuyao's following words made his heart sink. "Don't worry. I will spare his life." "Prince, isn't this a bit too heavy?" It was clear that Mo Xiuyao and Feng Huiting had a serious disagreement. Mo Xiuyao had never thought of taking Feng Jiao's life. Naturally, he would spare his life. Feng Huiting, on the other hand, believed that Mo Xiuyao only needed to keep him alive. Taking a deep breath, Feng Huiting said seriously, "Prince, no matter what, Feng Jiao is this old man's son. Now that he has made a mistake, I, as his father, should punish him." Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked at Feng Huiting and said, "I remember that the Feng family has already expelled Feng San from the family. His name hasn't been removed from the genealogy." Feng Huiting said firmly. As long as Feng Jiao's name was still on the genealogy, Feng Jiao would always be a descendant of the Feng family. Mo Xiuyao pondered for a moment, then shook his head. "It still won't do. Feng Jiao is already 30 years old. He has long been able to take responsibility for his own actions. Moreover, this matter is official and not family matters. Naturally, I will have to deal with it. Feng San, do you have anything to say?" Chapter 620. Feng Jiao had already been stunned when Feng Huiting pleaded on his behalf. How could he have anything else to say? He shook his head in a daze. Emo Xiaoyao was in a good mood as he turned to look at Feng Whiting. Look, Feng San himself doesn't have any objections. Feng Whiting gritted his teeth and said, "It's this old man's fault for not teaching his son well. This old man is willing to accept the punishment in his place. I ask Prince to grant my wish." Emo Xiaoyao stared at Feng Whiting and said indifferently, "Master Feng, you must think this through. The punishments in the Prince Ding mansion have always been severe. Not to mention an old and weak person like Master Feng. Even those young people who have undergone special training can't endure it. Accepting the punishment in place of someone else should be doubled." Feng Whiting said firmly, "It's the father's fault for not teaching. This old man deserves it. I ask Prince to grant my wish." The smile on Emo Xiaoyao's face became even more joyful. "Feng San, what do you say?" Feng Zhiyao finally came back to his senses. He frowned and said coldly, "A man is responsible for his own actions. Who wants him to accept the punishment in place of him? This young master has nothing to do with him." Emo Xiaoyao looked at Feng Whiting awkwardly. "Master Feng, you see?" Yili secretly tugged at his sleeve, indicating for him to stop before going too far. Feng Whiting glanced at Feng Zhiyao and said to Emo Xiaoyao, "As long as his surname is Feng, he won't be able to make the decision. I ask Prince to grant his wish."
Good.
Emo Xiaoyao turned and gave Yili a reassuring smile.
Guards.
"Take Master Feng away to receive his punishment." "Prince." Feng Zhiyao stomped his feet in anger. Of course, he knew that Emo Xiaoyao wouldn't really torture him to death. However, the possible punishment didn't mean that his father, who is nearly 60 years old, would be able to endure it. The guards outside had already come in and escorted Feng Whiting away. Just as Feng Zhiyao was about to run out of the door, a gust of wind blew past. Feng Zhiyao felt his legs go numb, and he fell to his knees. He could only watch as Feng Zhiyao was taken away. "Why are you running?" "I haven't settled the score with you yet," Emo Xiaoyao said with a smile as he looked at Feng Zhiyao, who was kneeling on the ground with one leg. Feng Zhiyao said with a bitter face, "Prince, that old man is almost 60 years old. Are you really going to kill him?" Emo Xiaoyao glanced at him and said, "Isn't killing him exactly what you want? Don't you hate him to death?" Feng Zhiyao gritted his teeth. "He's my father." No matter how unhappy he was that the old man was biased, he couldn't really want his father to die. "I remember that someone just told me that it had nothing to do with him. Now it's your father, Prince?" Feng Zhiyao was so anxious that he wanted to cry. He could only hope that his brothers wouldn't act so quickly. According to the speed of noble consort Lu's misfortune, the execution might be over if they dilly-dallied for a while. "Prince, I was wrong."
What do you want?
"I'll work for you until I die, okay?" Mo Xiaoyao said with disdain. "You are going to work for me until you die. Then what do you want?" "Have your father come with us to the northwest." "I didn't ask."
Huh?
Feng Zhiyao was dumbfounded. How come he didn't know that Emo Xiaoyao had taken a fancy to his father? "You don't agree?" Emo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes dangerously. "I agree. I agree." Feng Zhiyao nodded repeatedly. "But I'm afraid my father won't agree." Emo Xiaoyao leisurely clapped his hands and smiled. "That's none of I's business. You can tell him that if he doesn't agree, I will kill you. Go." Waving his hand, Emo Xiaoyao sent Feng Zhiyao away with satisfaction. Seeing Yi Li and the Empress covering their mouths to hold back their laughter, Feng Zhiyao realized that he had been fooled. Helplessly hanging his head, Feng Zhiyao went out to find his father. Behind him came Emo Xiaoyao's obviously happy voice. "It's all over. Your father must remember to go to the study and finish all the work that has piled up these days. You said it yourself. Work until you die." Feng Zhiyao's legs went soft. He was a pig's brain, watching Feng Zhiyao leave with a smile. Yili looked at Emo Xiaoyao and said helplessly, "Why did you have to tease him like that?" Emo Xiaoyao coldly snorted and said, "Tease him? I didn't tease him. If he doesn't help me out in these few months, I will let him down." Yili shook her head and asked, "Do you think Feng Zhiyao can persuade Master Feng?" To be honest, a business genius like Feng Whiting was indeed what they needed right now. Whether it was Han Mingxi or Leng Haoyu, they couldn't be considered talents in this area. Leng Haoyu's management of the Prince Ding Mansion's businesses wasn't a problem, but it was a bit difficult to support the economy of the entire Northwest and even a larger area. Moreover, Leng Haoyu himself came from a family of generals. For the sake of the Prince Ding Mansion, he had been an unknown businessman all these years. It was really a bit unfair for him. Yili understood that Immerse Xiaoyao was probably already preparing to find a talent to replace him when he was sent to the Purple Thorns Pass this time. However, Yili was still a bit surprised that he would find Feng Huiting. Immerse Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "Unless he doesn't want Feng Zhiyao's life anymore." Yili shook her head and said with some pessimism, "He's only Feng Zhiyao's father. On the other side are 2 legitimate sons and the entire Feng family. Feng Zhiyao alone probably isn't enough." Immerse Xiaoyao said, "That depends on whether Feng Huiting is a true businessman or not. It's not enough for a businessman to not have enough foresight. If that's the case, then it's fine to not use him." The Empress looked at the two and said softly with a smile, "The prince has put in a lot of effort for his subordinates. He really is a rare, wise ruler in the world. If the Feng family follows you, they will definitely not suffer in the future." Immerse Xiaoyao looked at her and said, "Then what about the Hua family?" The Empress was startled and shook her head helplessly. "The Hua family? I can't make the decision." She understood her father well enough. Even if the Dechu state was really going to be destroyed, he probably wouldn't leave the Dechu state. They had fought for this country their entire lives. The older generation actually viewed the Dechu state as more important than their own lives. It was impossible to convince them to leave. Immerse Xiaoyao clearly understood Du Hua well enough. He nodded and said, "I won't force the Hua family to make a decision. Thank you, Xiaoyao." The Empress smiled faintly. Immerse Xiaoyao smiled faintly. In the Li Palace, Missouri Jingli, who had just obtained almost all of the Feng family, sat in the study in a good mood and looked at the accounts that the Feng family had just sent over. His lips curled into a cold smile. So, what if Mo Jingqi's last-minute stroke ruined all of his plans? He was still alive. Mo Jingqi was already dead. Only the living could see the future's ending. Only the living could see everything. Mo Jingqi was counting on Immerse Xiaoyao to clean up the mess for him. Unfortunately, Immerse Xiaoyao was not interested in this at all. Moreover, with his current strength, even if he wanted to go head-to-head with Immerse Xiaoyao, he might be able to put up a fight. However, thinking of the stalemate in the Purple Thorn Pass, Mo Jingli snorted. He couldn't go and provoke Immerse Xiaoyao for now. Chapter 621. Prince, Noble Consort Liu, is here. Outside the door, the steward reported. Mo Jingli frowned unhappily and said, "What is she doing here?" Although he was not afraid of any gossip now, Noble Consort Liu was his brother's widow after all. How could Noble Consort Liu come to the Prince Regent's mansion when the late Emperor's body was still cold? Moreover, Mo Jingli had always disliked Noble Consort Liu. Naturally, he was not happy to hear that she came to his mansion so suddenly. Noble Consort Liu seems to be seriously injured. She said that she must see the prince. The steward reported carefully. Mo Jingli snorted and said, "She went to the Prince Regent's mansion to ask for trouble, didn't she?" He stood up angrily and ordered, "Take her to the flower hall. I will go there later." Mo Jingli stepped into the flower hall and saw Noble Consort Liu's miserable appearance. He couldn't help but be shocked. Her snow-white robe was stained with blood. He could tell at a glance that it was caused by a whip. Her clothes were even torn in some places. There were bloodstains on her pale face that hadn't been wiped clean, and her right hand hung unnaturally. "What happened?" Mo Jingli said unhappily in a deep voice. Noble Consort Liu came to his mansion in such a state. If the news spread out, it would cause another disturbance. Noble Consort Liu raised her head and looked at him. She sneered and said, "What else could it be? Don't you know it? Immerse Xiaoyao did it." Mo Jingli looked at Noble Consort Liu carefully. He found that this woman seemed to have changed a little. Before, When she mentioned Imo Xiuyao, this woman's eyes were always filled with undisguised infatuation and admiration. But now, they were filled with hatred. Although there was still some infatuation in the depth of her eyes, Imo Jingli believed that at this moment, noble consort Lu hated Imo Xiuyao more than she loved him. Imo Jingli sat down opposite her and said indifferently, "I warned you long ago. Don't mess with Imo Xiuyao. You should understand now, right? In this lifetime, other than Yili, which other woman had Imo Xiuyao been so affectionate towards? Even Su Zuidi. Didn't she also die in the hands of Imo Xiuyao? Don't compare that woman with I." Noble consort Lu said with disgust. Imo Jingli curled his lips and thought to himself, "Do you think you're any better than Su Zuidi?" Imo Jingli didn't bother to pay attention to her thoughts. He asked impatiently, "What are you doing here instead of going to the Lu family?" Noble consort Lu looked down and said calmly, "The Lu family? Haha. Earlier, my father told me that he planned to betroth my little niece to King Li. Prince Li had good luck with women. My little niece is indeed a budding beauty. She can be considered one of the top beauties in the capital." Imo Jingli frowned, but he soon understood what noble consort Lu meant and what the Lu family was planning. He stared at noble consort Lu and said, "What do you want to do?" Noble consort Lu said with a smile, "I know you want the Lu family to support you, but you don't want to be controlled by the Lu family. I can help you get the Lu family in one piece. You don't have to marry the Lu family." "What's the condition?" Imo Jingli asked directly. Noble consort Lu naturally wouldn't help him for no reason. Noble consort Lu said with a smile, "Prince Li is really straightforward. The condition is, I want you to help me kill Yili." Imo Jingli was startled. He looked down and said, "Kill Yili? Am I crazy? Killing Yili will lead to Imo Xiuyao's revenge? Who can bear it?" When Yili fell off the cliff, Imo Xiuyao decisively cut off all ties with the Dechu state. Not only did he occupy a large piece of land in the northwest of the Dechu state, but he also almost caused a great disaster. After so many years, of course Imo Jingli could find out some of the things that happened in the past. After Yili fell off the cliff, Imo Xiuyao's health was very bad. Otherwise, Imo Xiuyao would have dared to attack the Dechu state. Not to mention that they already had a child now. Their relationship must be even better than before. Noble consort Lu sneered, "With Prince Li's current strength, do you still need to be afraid of the Prince Ding mansion? As long as you have the power of the Lu family, at least half of the people in the court will support you. Then you can openly wait for the throne." "Stupid woman," Imo Jingli said without any trace of politeness. The Mahist army might not have been so scary, but the situation between the countries seemed calm now, but in fact, it could be triggered at any moment. And the Dechu state was already facing an attack from the north. As long as the Mahist army interfered, the Dechu state would be an enemy on both sides. When the time came, the northern tribes would definitely benefit from it. The Dechu state now could not afford to offend Imo Xiuyao more than ever. "You really won't agree?" Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes. "Then, do you still want your son?" Imo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of hostility, but he quickly suppressed it, changed the condition. "I can't kill Yili. Not to mention anything else. Yili herself is a first-class expert. She also has the Shadow Guard and Shi Lin by her side. If it was so easy to kill her, would you come back to I?" Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and thought for a moment. "Kill Yili's son."
Why?
Imo Jingli frowned and asked, "I want her to live a life worse than death." Noble consort Lu's beautiful face was twisted like a ghost's. "I want her to lose the most important person in her life. I want her to live in heart-wrenching pain day and night, and never have peace for the rest of her life." The hall was silent for a moment. Imo Jingli said, "I refuse."
You.
Noble consort Lu stared at Imo Jingli angrily. Mo Jingli sneered, "Don't think that this trick will work every time. Until now, I haven't even seen my son. I said if you dare to lie to me, I will make your life worse than death." Noble consort Lu's body trembled slightly. The pain that she tried to ignore came faintly, and she couldn't help but moan in pain. With a pale face, noble consort Lu stood up and said, "Since you don't believe then there's nothing to talk about. I'll leave now." Mo Jingli stared at her and said, "I don't care what you want to do. Just don't touch Yili." Noble consort Lu raised her eyebrows in surprise. She turned around and looked at Mo Jingli for a while, then said, "Don't touch Yili? It seems that Prince Li doesn't want to promise me, not because he is afraid of Prince Ding but because he really misses Yili. It's rare that Prince Li would miss a woman he doesn't want to leave. Or are men so cheap that they can't get what they want?" Mo Jingli sneered, "That's none of your business. It's better than him not even taking a look at you even if you send yourself to his door." "You humph." Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and left in a huff. She left proudly with countless thoughts and calculations in her mind, but she didn't know that the real unlucky thing was staring at her from behind. Chapter 6:22. As soon as noble consort Lu returned to her palace, she found that her palace, which was supposed to be empty, was full of people. From the Empress Dowager to the concubines in the palace, they were all present. Sitting next to the Empress Dowager was Madame Li, who was called Consort Li by the servants because of her relationship with the 10th prince. Sitting on the left side of the Empress Dowager was Consort Zheng Xian, the birth mother of the 6th prince. As soon as she stepped into the hall, Consort Zheng Xian glared at her fiercely. Her face, which was not young anymore, was full of gloating. Noble consort Lu frowned slightly. She had a bad feeling. "Empress Dowager, why did you bring so many people to Ai's palace?" Staring at the Empress Dowager, noble consort Lu raised her chin proudly. The Empress Dowager sneered and said, "I want to ask you, the Emperor's body is not cold yet. As a concubine, where did you go instead of mourning in the palace?" Consort Zheng Xian next to her stared at noble consort Lu for a while. Then she rolled her eyes and screamed, "Empress Dowager, sister noble consort Lu seems to be injured. Look, even her clothes are torn." Everyone's eyes immediately fell on noble consort Lu. Noble consort Lu gathered the cloak on her body. Her face darkened. She should have changed her clothes before coming back, but she had broken off relations with the Prime Minister's mansion. Noble consort Lu was too proud to go back to the Prime Minister's mansion, and the Prince Li's mansion would not provide her with any clothes. Noble consort Lu didn't like the clothes of those poor people and maids. Therefore, she came back with the cloak covering the blood on her clothes. She didn't expect to be blocked in the main hall. The Empress Dowager's old face flashed a sneer. She said coldly, "Where did you go, and what did you do? Tell me the truth." Everyone present looked at noble consort Lu with a strange expression. These women had lived in the palace for half of their lives. It had become their instinct to step on the weak. She naturally bore a grudge against noble consort Lu, who had been favored by the emperor for more than 10 years. If Mo Jingqi was still here, noble consort Lu would still be favored, and no one would dare to say anything. But once noble consort Lu fell from grace, there would be many people who would hit her when she was down. A woman whose husband was still in mourning quietly ran out of the palace and came back with bloodstains and tattered clothes. Everyone's mind was filled with their own imagination. Noble consort Lu glanced at these women disdainfully. Of course, she knew what these women were thinking. With a sneer, she raised her head and looked at the Empress Dowager. "What I do has nothing to do with the Empress Dowager."
"Bitch."
The Empress Dowager angrily rebuked. Aijia is the late emperor's birth mother and the new emperor's biological grandmother. Do you think Aijia can't control you? It was you, this bitch, who instigated the discord between the late emperor and brotherly causing us, mother and son, to have a weak relationship. Do you think there's anyone who can support you now? The late emperor's body hasn't even turned cold, and you're already running to the Prince Ding mansion. You're really, really shameless. You've disgraced the imperial family. The Empress Dowager cursed and stared at noble consort Lu with hatred in her eyes. If it weren't for the fact that Emo Jingqi only favored noble consort Lu and even contradicted her, his own mother, she wouldn't have turned to raise her youngest son. Wasn't it because she was afraid that her eldest son would be bewitched by this bitch and lose her foothold in the imperial palace? If it weren't for this bitch, how could they, mother and son, end up like this? Noble consort Lu sneered coldly. You didn't teach your son well. How can you blame I? Bitch. If I don't teach you a lesson today, you won't know what you are. The Empress Dowager sneered. Noble consort Lu's phoenix-like eyes flickered. How dare you touch me? The Empress Dowager laughed. Try me. Guards, drag this shameless bitch away and beat her 30 times with a paddle. He wanted everyone to see that this was the consequence of being shameless. Besides, demote noble consort Lu to noble lady. How dare you?
Guards.
Noble consort Lu said harshly. Her henchmen who were guarding in her hall didn't respond. The Empress Dowager showed a complacent smile to her. The eunuchs guarding outside the hall came in and wanted to take her away. Noble consort Lu struggled and said, Old woman, if you dare to touch I won't let you go. The Empress Dowager didn't take her threat seriously at all. The Lu family has given up on you. What can you use to not let me go? Besides, do you think I'm still afraid of the Lu family now? Noble consort Lu was stunned. She looked at the Empress Dowager, who seemed to be winning and didn't seem to be in a panic these days. She knew that the Empress Dowager might have gotten some bargaining chips. Otherwise, the Empress Dowager wouldn't dare to be so rude to her. If you dare to touch I, take her away. Beat her. The Empress Dowager said. Soon, the sound of the paddle came from outside the hall. It was very clear in the empty hall. The timid concubines in the hall had already turned pale. The Empress Dowager was drinking tea peacefully. Hearing the sound of the paddle outside, a trace of pleasure flashed through her eyes. Empress Dowager, is it? Madame Li's face turned pale. She looked at the Empress Dowager and hesitated. The Empress Dowager said indifferently, You'll be the Empress Dowager in the future.
Learn more.
Some people don't know how high the sky is until they are taught a lesson. Madame Li moved her lips. Finally, she nodded in a low voice. Yes, Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager nodded with satisfaction. Noble consort Lu was already covered with wounds. She fainted before she could endure more than 30 strokes of the plank. The Empress Dowager had been holding a grudge against noble consort Lu for a long time. How could she let her off so easily? Without blinking, she ordered people to wake noble consort Lu up with water and continue to paddle her. After 30 paddles, noble consort Lu passed out because of the pain. She wished she could die now. After the last paddle, noble consort Lu finally fell into darkness again. In the Zhangde Palace, the Empress Dowager waved the servants away and stepped into the bedchamber alone. At this time, there was an ordinary-looking palace maid sitting in the splendid bedchamber. She couldn't be recognized in a crowd. Seeing the Empress Dowager come in, the palace maid was neither surprised nor stood up. She said with a smile, I already know what happened just now. I think the prince will be very satisfied. The Empress Dowager lowered her eyes. She was so careful that she didn't look like the mother of the country. She asked in a low voice, then, Prince Ding's promise? The palace maid said with a smile, Don't worry, Empress Dowager. Although our prince has a grudge against Emo Jingqi, he will take responsibility for what he did. He will never make things difficult for you. As long as you do what the prince asked you to do, not only the matter of the burial can be solved, but also the power that belonged to the Empress in the original I can be given to you. By then, you can completely control the whole palace. What do you need to be afraid of? Although the palace maid looked ordinary, her expression and words were very persuasive. Especially the power in the original Empress Dowager's hand had always been coveted by the Empress Dowager. Now she could easily get it. Tell Prince Ding to rest assured. Noble consort Lu is mine. I will take good care of her. Even if Li wants to protect her, I can make her die quietly. Speaking of this, the Empress Dowager's eyes flashed a murderous look. She didn't understand why her son refused to save his mother, but helped a bitch who had nothing to do with him. Was this noble consort Lu really a vixen? It was not enough to bewitch her eldest son, but now she also wanted to bewitch her youngest son. Chapter 6:23. Princess Jun Ning was a little scared of this younger brother she had brought up. She twisted the corner of her clothes and said uneasily, "Shower, that's our biological mother." Mo Xiaoyan snorted, "Biological? When did she treat us as her biological children? Do you know what kind of situation you are in now? If you and your younger brother are implicated because of her." The Duke of Qin was very concerned about this elder sister who had taken care of him since he was young. Noble consort Lu had been very cold to her children since they were young. Most of the time, it was Princess Jun Ning, who was 2 years older, who took care of them. Now that he had been conferred the title of Duke of Qin, he could only live outside the palace. His younger brother, who was only 8 years old, had to be taken care of by Jun Ning. Can't we really save her?" Princess Jun Ning asked carefully. Mo Xiaoyan sneered, "Do you know what she did?"
What?
Princess Jun Ning was stunned. Subconsciously, she didn't think that her mother would do anything unforgivable. Mo Xiaoyan said coldly, "She ran to the Prince Ding mansion to threaten Prince Ding to marry her, and even insulted Princess Ding. If she really marries Prince Ding, no matter if she becomes the equal consort or secondary consort, what will happen to us? Sister, have you thought about it?" Mo Xiaoyan, who had been taught by Prime Minister Lu since he was young, wasn't stupid. He recalled that when Prince Ding had just returned to the capital, his mother had hurriedly left the palace. Afterwards, his father had promoted several princes and concubines. He knew that noble consort Lu's idea didn't only come about after his father passed away. Originally, he did not believe it, but when he saw with his own eyes that his beautiful and arrogant imperial concubine mother was thrown out of Ding Wangfu in a sorry state and refused to give up, his heart turned completely cold. Grandfather was right. His mother had never taken him and his brother seriously. For himself, for his sister and brother, he couldn't have anything to do with her anymore. How could it be? Princess Jun Ning opened her eyes wide in shock. She had lived in the palace since she was young and learned the female precepts taught by the palace nannies. What she remembered were the rules of conduct as a woman. No matter which one it was, his mother's behavior was undoubtedly spurned by the world. Mo Xiaoyan looked at her. "Do you understand? If you understand, then don't go see her again. But if I don't go, she'll die." No matter how ignorant Princess Jun Ning was, she still lived in the big vat that was the imperial palace. She naturally knew what would happen to a woman who was banished to the cold palace, not to mention that her mother was seriously injured. Under her brother's determined gaze, Princess Jun Ning finally lowered her head. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "I understand." Seeing that she agreed, Mo Xiaoyan's expression eased up. Knowing that his sister was upset, he said in a deep voice, "Sister, I'm doing this for our own good. Rather than letting her cause countless troubles outside, it was better to keep her in the cold palace. Could it be that you want others to know that we have another imperial mother?" Mo Xiaoyan did not finish his sentence, but Princess Jun Ning understood what he wanted to say. Princess Jun Ning nodded and said, "I understand. That's good. Sister, you should rest early. I'm leaving the palace." Mo Xiaoyan said softly, "Take good care of little brother. Don't let him cause trouble everywhere." "I understand." Princess Jun Ning nodded. She pulled Mo Xiaoyan a little worriedly and asked, "How are you going to leave the palace at this time?" It was already the 4th watch period, and the palace gates had long been locked. Mo Xiaoyan smiled and said, "Since I can come in, I can naturally go out. Don't worry. Sister, take care." After watching her brother leave, Princess Jun Ning turned and entered the palace. On the way in, she did not even meet a single palace maid. Because they were not valued by their birth mother, their palace maids and eunuchs were not meticulous. Now that noble consort Lu was in trouble, these people simply became lazy in broad daylight. It was also because of this that Princess Jinning was gone for so long without being discovered. After returning to her room, Princess Jinning found the backup medicine she kept. She gritted her teeth and still turned to leave. She also didn't want people to know that she had a shameless mouffe. She wasn't an ignorant young girl who didn't know anything. She naturally knew that if noble consort Lu really succeeded and entered Dingwang Fu, what would happen to her and her siblings. Especially her, as a princess who was about to reach marriageable age. It was impossible for their mother to take them to the Prince Ding mansion, and as princes and princesses, it was also impossible for them to go to the Prince Ding mansion. But even so, they could not let their mother die because her injuries could not be treated. After delivering the medicine, they should go back. Princess Jinning thought silently in her heart. I'm afraid she won't be able to live. A faint voice entered Princess Jinning's ears. Princess Jinning jumped in fright and hurriedly hid behind a flowering tree by the roadside. It was the end of the month. The crescent moon was dim and did not leave any trace as she hid in the shade of the tree. A pair of night patrolling eunuchs slowly came from not far away. Perhaps it was because it was easy to fall asleep late at night. The two eunuchs began to gossip as they walked. That's natural. Don't look at that person who used to be the most favored in the 6 palaces. Now that the late emperor has passed away, he even offended the Empress Dowager. I heard that Zhongde Palace has sent word that that person must be put to death. Pooh, don't talk nonsense. If it gets out, Zhongde Palace's eunuch Feng is my godfather. How could his words be false? That's true. Eunuch Feng is the Empress Dowager's right-hand man. I heard that Zhongde Palace is going to be overturned. Isn't that so? I heard that person offended Prince Ding.
Sai, have you heard about that?
His companion on the side revealed a tacit smile. How could I not have heard? I'm afraid it's already spread throughout the imperial city. It's just that they don't dare to casually spread it out because they're worried about the imperial family's reputation. Who doesn't know that Prince Ding is devoted to the princess consort? After all these years, he hasn't even had a bed warmer. This matter, in the past, that person was always as cold as ice, but I didn't expect. The words that followed were somewhat unbearable to the ears. Fortunately, the two eunuchs gradually walked away. Under the dim moonlight, the delicate young girl's face was pale as she looked at the small path that was already devoid of people, trembling slightly. Chapter 6:24. What are you doing here? Noble consort Lu, who couldn't sleep because of the pain, raised her head and saw Princess Jinning standing at the door, looking at her with a pale face. Princess Jinning walked in and silently placed the medicine bottle beside the bed. Noble consort Lu glanced at her and said indifferently, "Apply medicine for me." Princess Jinning bit her lip, wanting to say something. Seeing noble consort Lu lying on the bed with blood, she still went to treat her wounds first. Noble consort Lu's injuries were extremely serious. Not only did she get beaten until she was covered in blood, but she also got whipped in the Prince Ding mansion. Originally, although she was in pain at the Prince Ding mansion, it was still bearable. However, after coming back, it gradually became more and more painful, as if the pain had reached her bones. This made noble consort Lu extremely painful. Noble consort Lu, who knew a bit of martial arts, guessed that it was very likely that the guards of the Prince Ding mansion secretly did this to her. When she thought of this, her hatred for Yi Li and the Prince Ding mansion grew even stronger. Princess Jinning carefully tore apart the already tattered clothes on her body. As a princess, she didn't know how to deal with these things, so it was inevitable that she hurt noble consort Lu. Fortunately, noble consort Lu also knew that she couldn't find anyone else to help her, so she could only grit her teeth and endure. After cutting open the clothes that were stained with dark red blood, the mangled flesh in front of her eyes almost made Princess Jinning want to vomit. She could only hurriedly clean the wounds with trembling hands and apply medicine. Then she began to treat the whip wounds that didn't look too serious. After taking care of these, the delicate girl's face was already covered in sweat. The medicine that Princess Zhenning brought was top-grade healing medicine. Although it still hurt after the medicine was applied, noble consort Lu gradually felt that it was bearable. She lay on the bed and closed her eyes drowsily. You can go back. Come back tomorrow night and bring some clean clothes over. Princess Zhenning bit her lip and said in a small voice, Mother, Zhenning can't come tomorrow. What do you mean? Noble consort Lu opened her eyes and asked coldly. Princess Zhenning said, When I went back just now, Zhenning ran into shower. Mother, you have to be careful. Imperial grandmother wants to kill you. Noble consort Lu stared at her daughter and asked, Who told you that? Princess Zhenning shook her head and said, I heard it from a passing eunuch in the Imperial garden just now. She said, Imperial mother, you have offended Prince Ding and the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager wants to kill you. Concubine Lu squinted her eyes, gritted her teeth, and said, It is him. What did your brother say? Princess Zhenning shook her head and refused to speak. How could noble consort Lu not understand? Although there was a flash of depression in her heart because of her son's heartlessness, she quickly threw it to the back of her mind. He looked at Princess Zhenning with a faint smile and said, Now that I'm in trouble, you siblings are afraid that I'll implicate you, so you want to draw a clear distance from me, right? Princess Zhenning looked sorrowfully at the woman in front of her, who was smiling like a flower but made her feel cold for no reason. Perhaps it was because of this that they wanted to distance themselves from each other, but it was more because of their own mother's heartlessness. And the things she had done as children, how could they accept it? Soon, noble consort Lu stopped smiling. She looked at Princess Zhenning and sighed softly. She said with a heavy heart, I understand why you're doing this. As your imperial mother, I've never doted on you two since you were young. You two should take care of yourselves. Imperial mother. Princess Zhenning looked at her sadly. Noble consort Lu pulled her in front of her and said in a low voice, Imperial mother only begs you. In 2 days bring me 2 sets of clean clothes. Imperial mother has been proud all my life. Even if I'm going to die, I want to die cleanly. I definitely won't let those sluts see me as a joke. Imperial mother? Princess Zhenning sobbed. Imperial mother, don't worry. Tomorrow night, Zhenning will bring the clothes over. A trace of satisfaction flashed through noble consort Lu's eyes. She said softly, No need to rush. You might be discovered if you come out 2 nights in a row. In a few days, the new emperor will ascend the throne, right? There are still 3 days. In 3 days, 10th brother will ascend the throne. Princess Zhenning replied. Noble consort Lu nodded and said, All right, you can take advantage of that time to come over. As for your grandfather and younger brother, you don't need to tell them, in case they become unhappy. Princess Zhenning nodded and said, Daughter understands. Imperial mother, don't worry. Daughter will leave first. Go. Watching Princess Zhenning disappear step by step, noble consort Lu's originally gentle eyes gradually turned icy cold. The smile on her lips also became increasingly grim and strange. You want me to die? It won't be that easy. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these 3 days, everyone was busy preparing for the new emperor's ascension ceremony. Naturally, for the time being, no one was in the mood to pay attention to a woman who had been locked up in the cold palace and demoted to a noble lady. On the day of the ceremony, the entire Dechu state's imperial city was filled with jubilation. Even the mourning of the late emperor's passing was completely washed away. This kind of unbridled celebration during the mourning period naturally caused many scholars to be dissatisfied. However, the ascension of a new emperor was basically a national celebration. Moreover, the new emperor was still young. Everything would be presided over by the Prince Regent. Now that the Dechu state was facing difficulties both internally and externally, it needed some sort of joyous occasion to impact it. Therefore, many people tacitly agreed. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, as Prince Ding and Princess Consort Lu, were also the leaders of the Mahist army. Naturally, they also had to attend the ascension ceremony. However, the two of them didn't attend as officials or hosts. Instead, they attended as guests with the other envoys who had come to congratulate them. Of course, this caused many of the old officials of the Dechu state to be extremely disappointed. However, it also caused even more people to feel relieved. Even though the Dechu state's national strength wasn't as great as it used to be, it was still a large country. Almost all the countries that could make it in time sent envoys to congratulate them. Although people such as Genom King of Gojoseon, Princess Anshi, and Emperor of the Northern Tribes didn't come in person, they still sent envoys with high status. It wasn't impolite. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao sat side by side at the front of the seats specially prepared for the envoys of various countries. They were both dressed in white clothes embroidered with dark silver patterns. Just sitting there casually was enough to attract the attention of all the people present. What was more, there was a delicate and lovely baby in front of each of them. Although no one knew who the delicate baby in white clothes in Yi Li's arms was, most people knew who the baby in black clothes in Mo Xiuyao's arms was. The baby was also handsome and had a faint arrogance. He was the heir of the Prince Ding mansion, the only heir of Mo Xiuyao, and the young master of the Mahist army, Mo Yuchen. A child with such a domineering name was destined to be the focus of the world's attention as soon as he was born. Great Elder Princess. There was still a long time before the ceremony officially began. Great Elder Princess walked over with the help of the palace maids. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao hurriedly stood up to greet her. Great Elder Princess waved her hand and said, "Well, since you are a guest, you don't have to be so polite." Deep regret, helplessness, and a touch of sadness flashed through the old man's eyes, which were full of wrinkles but shining with wisdom. Chapter 6:25. Yuchen, do you still remember me? Great Elder Princess looked lovingly at Mo Xiaobao, who was held in Mo Xiuyao's arms, and asked with a smile. Mo Xiaobao blinked and nodded. Nice to meet you, Princess. Ah. Great Elder Princess replied happily. Yuchen, do you still remember me? Why don't you come to play with me? Do you dislike me because I'm old? Mo Xiaobao looked at Great Elder Princess and said seriously, Yuchen needs to study and learn martial arts, so he can't go out to play. Princess, please come to our house to play. Then I will have time to play with you. What a smart boy. Great Elder Princess scolded him with a smile. She looked at Mo Xiaobao regretfully. It was a pity that there was no such smart boy in the royal family. Princess, this is my friend from the new school. You can call him Little Dai. Mo Xiaobao introduced Lung Junhan like an adult and deliberately omitted Lung Junhan's surname. Great Elder Princess squinted and looked at him carefully. She said with a smile, "He looks like a good boy." Yi Li smiled and said, "Xiaobao is not young anymore, Prince, and I just want to find a playmate for him." Great Elder Princess didn't ask about Lung Junhan's identity. She nodded with a smile and said, "It's good to have someone to accompany him. It's not good for a child to be alone. I want to choose a few children of suitable age from the nobles to be His Majesty's study companions after the 10th prince ascends the throne." Yi Li smiled and didn't say anything. Great Elder Princess's idea was certainly good. If the 10th prince had the ability, these children would become his confidants in the future. But it was not so easy. Since they came here as guests, they naturally couldn't ask about many things. Great Elder Princess just said it casually. She was also involved in political affairs in her early years. She was not a woman who was raised in the palace and knew nothing about the world. She naturally understood the current situation and difficulties. Xiuyao, I heard that you intend to protect the Zhongde Palace? Great Elder Princess looked at Mo Xiuyao and asked. Mo Xiuyao said with a smile, Princess, where did you hear this rumor? What does this matter have to do with our Prince Ding mansion? Since Xiuyao said that he won't interfere, he naturally means what he says. Great Elder Princess had watched him grow up, so it was not easy to fool him. She stared at him and said, Tell me the truth. Why do you keep her alive? I don't believe you have any feelings for her. Mo Xiuyao lowered his eyebrows and smiled. He didn't try to hide anything and said lightly, "No matter how close Imperial Aunt is to the new emperor, she lives outside the palace and is beyond her reach. The new emperor needs someone to protect him, or else." "Her?" Great Elder Princess asked with a frown. Emo Xiaoyao laughed and said, "As long as she knows that she will only be well if the new emperor is well, of course it's fine." Although the one in Zongda Palace is not familiar with politics, she has been in the palace for her entire life. "I'm afraid that she is more experienced than you, Imperial Aunt." Back then, she was able to protect those two brothers in that kind of environment until they grew up safely and ascended to the position of Empress Dowager. Imperial Aunt knows that she can't do it this time. Great Elder Princess seemed to be convinced by him and nodded. Even so, why does Xiaoyao care so much about the new emperor? Emo Xiaoyao laughed loudly and said, "I just don't like Emo Jingli." After this period of time, there is little affection left between them. As long as Imperial Aunt can give her a satisfactory bargaining chip, as long as she is still alive, Emo Jingli will always be princely. Hearing this, Great Elder Princess was thoughtful. She naturally knew that the relationship between Empress Dowager and Prince Li was tense, but she was not sure whether Empress Dowager could restrain Prince Li. A few heavy drums sounded, and the auspicious time of the Ascension ceremony had arrived. People who were whispering with their heads lowered all sat up straight and stared at the end of the huge red carpet with dragon patterns in front of them. A child of only 6 or 7 years old strolled over, surrounded by a large group of people. Empress Dowager, dressed in a gorgeous and graceful court dress, walked beside Emo Suyun and held the obviously timid child with one hand. From this moment on, she was no longer Empress Dowager, but Grand Empress Dowager. Seeing so many adults staring at him, Emo Suyun habitually wanted to shrink back. But one of his hands was firmly held by Empress Dowager and could not move. Empress Dowager looked down at him and whispered, "Don't be afraid. I will be with you." The little child, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, looked pitiful as if he had been abandoned. But he did not cry on such an occasion as he had made some progress. Empress Dowager's eyes flickered, and she reminded him faintly, "Do you remember what Great Elder Princess taught you?" "Yes." Emo Suyun whispered and looked at Imperial Grandmother in front of him with some fear. It seemed that thinking of the very amiable Great Elder Princess gave him more courage, and he nodded seriously. Empress Dowager said, "Good. Let's go. Great Elder Princess is also looking at you." Emo Suyun nodded his head and allowed the Empress Dowager to lead him to the high and mighty dragon throne. Although he was still very scared, he didn't just want to run away like he did before. When passing by Great Elder Princess, Emo Xiaoyao, and Yili's table, Emo Suyun's eyes lit up and he looked at Great Elder Princess and wanted to say something. Great Elder Princess smiled at him lovingly and shook her head. The child bit the corner of his lips with some grievance and followed Empress Dowager forward. The 10th prince has changed a lot. Aunt's teaching these days is not in vain. Yili sighed in a low voice. Great Elder Princess shook her head and said, "He is still far away." He was indeed better than a few days ago, but he still had a long way to go to become the emperor of a country. On the way, he needed the guidance and support of wise teachers. No one could be born to be a wise emperor, but she did not know whether those people would give him this opportunity. Emo Suyun was led by Empress Dowager up the high steps, and officials of the Ministry of Rites and the Imperial Astronomer were carrying out various complicated ceremonies. Even from a distance, Yili could see that the child's little body was tense and he was so tired that he was about to fall. However, he did not cry or say anything. Instead, he held on silently. Yili looked around and asked with some confusion, "Why didn't Madame Li come?" Madame Li was the birth mother of the new emperor. After the new emperor ascended the throne, she would be the Empress Dowager. It was impossible for her not to come to such an occasion. Great Elder Princess shook her head and said, in order to make the child obedient, Prince Regent had Madame Li locked up. Speaking of this, Great elder princess frowned and looked at Imo Jingli, who was sitting in the front in the distance, her eyes full of disapproval. When the new emperor ascended the throne, he put his birth mother, the Empress Dowager, under house arrest. Even if Prince Regent did this for the sake of the smooth ascension ceremony, he had gone too far. The ceremony, which lasted for nearly 2 hours, finally ended. The exhausted new emperor was taken away to rest. Then it was time for the banquet. The new emperor was young, so it was naturally presided over by Prince Regent Imo Jingli. Seeing Imo Jingli raise his glass to toast the guests and courtiers in high spirits, everyone could clearly feel that the vast land of the Chu state belonged to Prince Li, at least for the time being. Chapter 6:26. A long banquet was not suitable for Yi Li's favorite things. The 2 children who weren't even 6 years old couldn't sit still. After sitting for a while, Imo Xiaobao made a fuss about wanting to go out to play. Yi Li told Imo Xiaoyao and then took the 2 children to the imperial garden. It was the 3rd month. The grasses were long and orioles were flying in the imperial garden. Hundreds of flowers were blooming. Countless butterflies fluttered among the flowers, causing Lung Junhan to stare at them with her round eyes wide open. Seeing Lung Junhan squinting at the flowers and butterflies in front of her, Imo Xiaobao snorted disdainfully. Little dazed Lung was too ignorant. What was so good about these red and green flowers and butterflies flying everywhere? The scenery in the northwest was better. There was also Taigong's Lishan Academy full of green bamboo and Uncle Han's residence outside Li City. It was 100 times better than the imperial garden in the imperial palace. After ordering the guards to follow them, Yi Li let the 2 children play in the imperial garden. She went to sit in a secluded pavilion in the garden to relax. Looking at the familiar scenery, she couldn't help but recall the first time she entered the palace when she was betrothed to Imo Xiaoyao, and the many things that happened when they were newlyweds. At that time, the Prince Ding mansion was under the control of others. Now they were free and didn't have to worry about anything. And the emperor, who was full of ambition, had already passed away. His ambition had turned to dust. The number of people in the imperial garden gradually increased. Most of them were noble ladies and daughters of the various families. The banquet was lively and interesting, but they weren't men. It was boring to sit for too long. So many people came to the imperial garden in 2s and 3s to take a walk. The pavilion Yi Li sat in wasn't hidden. Naturally, many people saw her. But because of the Prince Ding mansion's special status, there weren't many people who dared to come up and talk. Yi Li didn't care. She didn't know many people in the Chu capital. Compared to those meaningless greetings, she was more willing to be alone. Princess, when he raised his head, he saw a familiar face. It was Qin Zheng's mother, the censor's wife. Yi Li smiled and said, "Madam Qin, please sit." Qin Foreign thanked her cautiously. Even though Prince Ding and Wang Fei had brought back Qin Zheng's letter for them when they first returned to Jing, what was said in the letter was not as reassuring as hearing it with one's own ears. However, due to their statuses, they couldn't visit them personally. Now that they saw Yi Li and Madame Qin in the imperial garden, they naturally wanted to ask about their daughter. Yi Li also understood her thoughts and said with a smile, "Madam, don't worry. Zheng and second brother are living very well now." Their child had also begun to be enlightened. He was a smart little guy. Even if Madam doesn't believe me, you should at least believe in the Su family style. They definitely won't let Zheng suffer. Not only would she not suffer, but the entire Su family treated Qin Zheng extremely well. Eldest Madam Su wanted to spoil Qin Zheng as her own daughter. There was no other way. The Su family had 5 young masters, but 4 of them were unwilling to marry. This made eldest Madame Su and second Madame Su hate that they didn't arrange more marriages when they were children. Qin Zheng was the Su family's only daughter-in-law and had given birth to the Su family's only great-grandson. How could they not dote on her? Madame Qin smiled with some embarrassment and said, "Wang Fei is joking." How could I not believe Wang Fei? But Yili smiled and patted the back of her hand comfortingly. I understand. Parents in the world are pitiful. Which parent doesn't worry about their children? Madam, don't worry. The Su family and second brother will definitely treat Zheng well. Otherwise, not to mention Madam and Censor Qin, even I won't agree. Su Qing's personality was slightly cold, but he was truly a good husband. In all these years, he hadn't even quarreled with Qin Zheng. They were so harmonious that Yili couldn't help but feel envious. She would occasionally quarrel with Emo Xiaoyao in a fit of pique. Madame Qin smiled with relief and said, "It is Zheng Er's fortune to have a friend like Wang Fei." Madame is joking. It is also my fortune to have a friend like Zheng Er. The two chatted happily. Seeing this, the madams watching in the surroundings also gathered around. Madame Qin and Yi Li naturally changed the topic and chatted with these upper-class madams. Following these noble women were beautiful young ladies from wealthy families. Seeing the shy and timid appearances of these young girls, Yi Li's heart moved and she couldn't help but laugh inwardly. So, these upper-class madams had ulterior motives. Coming forward to chat was a pretense. They wanted to promote their own daughters. Speaking of which, it was obvious that Prince Li was in power now. However, the influence of the Prince Ding mansion was not so easy to erase. If a girl caught the eye of Prince Ding and was able to climb into the Prince Ding mansion, it was naturally good to have another backer in the future. Even if they didn't, they would only lose a daughter. These nobles naturally didn't lack one or two concubine-born daughters, or even legitimate daughters. And these young ladies could be said to have grown up listening to the stories of Ding Wang Fu and had a natural admiration for the past generations of Ding Wang. Moreover, Emo Xiaoyao's devotion to Yi Li for so many years was a legend. If they could obtain the favor of this kind of man, it would naturally be the most beautiful dream in the hearts of every girl. Yi Li rarely encountered this kind of situation. In these years, it wasn't that there weren't girls who tried to curry favor with Emo Xiaoyao, but most of the time, Emo Xiaoyao was able to deal with them himself. The only one she had personally dealt with was noble consort Lu. However, these girls in front of her were not shameless and pestering like noble consort Lu. Yi Li naturally couldn't use her poisonous tongue to deal with these girls and upper-class madams. Just as she was helplessly complaining in her heart about Emo Xiaoyao's attracting bees and butterflies, a mournful scream came from the distance. Yi Li's heart jumped, and she suddenly stood up. Just now, Emo Xiaobao and Leng Junhan had gone in that direction. Leaving a word of excuse, Yi Li directly used Qinggong to rush out of the pavilion in the direction of the scream. The upper-class madams who were originally huddled together in the pavilion were startled by this sudden change. When they came back to their senses, they only saw Yi Li's white figure fluttering away like a butterfly. What's going on? Something probably happened over there. Someone said in a low voice. Let's also go quietly. Someone suggested. Soon, everyone moved in the direction of the scream outside the pavilion. The originally noisy pavilion suddenly quieted down. Walking at the back, Madame Qin saw the group of people chasing after Princess Ding's figure and shook her head with a smile, as she followed with a smile. Chapter 6:27. What's the matter? Yi Li hurried over. Seeing Emo Xiaobao and Leng Junhan standing there safely, she let out a sigh of relief and turned to ask the guard beside her. The two Qilin, who temporarily acted as shadow guards, looked helplessly at the woman who was in a mess not far away and then looked at their little master. Even if they were on the same side, they were embarrassed to say that their little master was wronged. Yi Li guessed what happened when she saw the shadow guard's expression. She glanced at Emo Xiaobao indifferently. Emo Xiaobao didn't show the slightest fear and even smiled sweetly at Yi Li. Yi Li looked to the side and saw that there were a few handsome children around the age of 7 or 8. Not far away, a delicate and pretty girl wearing a bright red dress with a lotus flower pattern was struggling to get up from the ground. Her bright red dress was stained with some unknown substance, The color was so strange that it made people feel uncomfortable. Beside the woman in red, a gorgeous woman in a bright red dress reached out to help the woman in red up, but was slapped away by the latter. The gorgeous woman didn't care and stood aside with a faint smile. Yili furrowed her brows as she finally recognized the familiar woman in red. She was the fiancée of Marquis Muyang's heir, whom she met once in the past. She was now the young madam of Marquis Muyang's heir. However, the delicate, graceful, and slightly shy young girl from back then was now a married woman wearing a bright red formal dress with a hint of harshness in her graceful bearing. Young Madame Mu stood up and raised her hand to slap Yaoji, who was standing beside her. Although Yaoji didn't know any martial arts, her dancing skills were superb and could be said to be the best in the world. She was agile and nimble. She had just raised her hand and Yaoji had already dodged to the side. "Young madam." Yaoji took a step back and said in a low voice with a slightly changed expression. Young Madame Mu's slap missed, and her face turned uglier.
Bitch.
"You dare to dodge. Do you think that when your husband was still at home, he would support you in everything?" Yaoji looked at her indifferently and said, "I don't know if Muyang can support me now. I only know that I'm in the palace now. If young Madame Mu really wants to make a scene, you won't be the only one who will be embarrassed. Marquis Muyang's mansion will also be in trouble." Young Mistress Mu couldn't help but feel suffocated. Of course, she knew that her parents-in-law loved the face of Marquis Muyang's residence the most. No matter who was right or wrong in today's matter, if he lost face in the palace, he would not be able to get away with it. However, she was unwilling to let Yaoji go just like that. In the past, when Muyang was in the Fu, he always protected this woman and embarrassed her. Now that Muyang had finally gone to war, her mother-in-law naturally had to give her some face because she didn't have a child, so she doted on this woman's son. Moreover, this woman was much more difficult to deal with than she was a few years ago. He couldn't get any benefits from her openly or secretly. This time, she finally found a reason to make a fuss, but it happened in a place like the palace and even alarmed Princess Ding. She glanced at Yi Li and the three children not far away with hatred and sneered. "What? Is Princess Ding here to support this bitch? How come I don't know that a bitch of our Marquis Muyang's mansion can make Princess Ding so worried?" Yi Li frowned slightly and looked at young Mistress Mu, saying indifferently, "Young Mistress Mu, you think too much. I just heard the screams here and came to take a look in case my children are in danger." Although she said so, Yi Li couldn't help but sigh with regret in her heart. In just a few years, this young Mistress Mu had changed too much compared to the slightly scheming but still gentle and pretty girl. The most incomprehensible thing was, where did her hatred for her come from? Although Yaoji's return to Marquis Muyang's mansion was instigated by her, this young Mistress Mu would never know about it. And when they met that year, Yi Li asked herself if she was biased towards Yaoji. "It seems that young Mistress Mu is fine. I won't disturb you anymore, goodbye." After Yi Li finished speaking, she turned to Mo Xiaobao and said, "Why aren't you bringing Junon over? Are you fooling around again?" Mo Xiaobao pouted and walked slowly to Yi Li. He looked up and said, "I'm not fooling around. I found a new friend. Mother, I want to play with him." Mo Xiaobao pointed at the child standing at the side. It was the only young master of Marquis Muyang's mansion, Mu Lai. Before Yi Li could say anything, young Mistress Mu sneered and said in a sharp voice, "Ding Wang Fu's Shitzi really has a special taste, eagerly chasing after a lowly concubine's son to play? No wonder he didn't show any etiquette." As she said that, she looked at the hem of her blouse with disgust. There was a lump of something that she didn't know. It was especially conspicuous on the auspicious and graceful bright red dress of the madam. Next to her, Yaoji pulled her and whispered, "Young mistress, be careful with your words." Young Mistress Mu glared at Yaoji fiercely, the anger in her heart rising. The clothes she was wearing were the masterpiece of the handsome and well-behaved Prince Ding Mansion's Shitzi, who wore a black brocade robe. Originally, she was walking in the garden with Yaoji and conveniently scolding the mother and son with some sarcastic and satirical remarks. She happened to see two children playing by the garden. She was married to Mu Yang for so many years but didn't have any children, so she was especially envious and fond of other people's children. Of course, Mu Lai, who was born by Yaoji, was an exception. Young Mistress Mu saw the two children playing by the garden, so she walked over to take a look at the two children. The shadow guard beside Mo Xiaobao saw that she didn't have any ill intentions and also saw his Shizi's gesture, so he didn't stop her. Who knew that when she just squatted down and didn't touch Mo Xiaobao, something jumped out of Mo Xiaobao's arms and pounced on young Mistress Mu. Young Mistress Mu was shocked and wanted to dodge, but something tripped her and she fell to the ground. That black and wet little thing, which she didn't know whether it was a cat or a dog, stepped on her body a few times and quickly scurried away. That wasn't all. Mo Xiaobao didn't apologize for scaring others and even mocked them without holding back. He even pulled Mu Lai aside to chat and laugh. It turned out that young Mistress Mu's words about Yaoji and Mu Lai were all heard by Mo Xiaobao, so young Master Mo decided to be chivalrous and handed over to his friend. While they were talking, the madams and young ladies behind Yi Li had already caught up. Seeing young Mistress Mu's sorry state, they couldn't help but show a surprised expression and stare blankly. Young Mistress Mu was embarrassed and angry by everyone's stares. She was born in a noble family and was also pampered after marrying into Marquis Muyang's residence. Everyone was courteous to her. When had she ever lost face like this? In her extreme anger, a burst of anger rushed to her head, and she couldn't control her mouth anymore. She looked at Yi Li provocatively and said, "Isn't it so? I just wanted to greet the Shizi of the Prince Ding mansion, but he made me like this. If this isn't uneducated, what is?" Yi Li's face darkened. Perhaps Mo Xiaobao was in the wrong, but young Mistress Mu's words were too harsh. Moreover, Marquis Muyang's residence didn't have the right to teach the people of the Prince Ding mansion a lesson. The madams and young ladies present looked at the sorry young Mistress Mu as if they were looking at a lunatic. Chapter 6:28. Without waiting for Yi Li to speak, Mo Xiaobao poked his head out from behind Yi Li. "Mother, it's not like that. I didn't do it on purpose." His big black eyes were wet as they looked around. The hearts of the surrounding madams and misses immediately went to the side. Yi Li bent over with a smile and rubbed her son's head. "Then what happened? Tell Nyangqin?" Mo Xiaobao said aggrievedly, "I saw a puppy fall into the water over there, so I had someone pull it out. I and Xiaolong were thinking of a way to dry the puppy's fur. This auntie suddenly wanted to pat me from behind. I was scared and carried the puppy out. Then, Mother, I didn't deliberately dirty the auntie's clothes, but this auntie was very angry. Mother, can we compensate her with another set of clothes? I don't have money, so Mother will pay for me. When I grow up, I will definitely earn money to return it to Mother." Looking at the handsome child who didn't even reach their thighs seriously discussing with his mother, the hearts of the madams and Mrs. present softened. If they had the same background as Yi Li, they would know a word. Cute. The group of pampered madams and Mrs. were instantly turned over by this cute and obedient child who dared to admit his mistake. "Little Shizi, this was just an accident. I don't think young Madame Mu will mind." Someone quickly comforted him. "Really?" Mo Xiaobao raised his head and looked at the madam who spoke. His big wet eyes were filled with worry. "Of course it's true. A set of clothes isn't worth much. Little Shizi doesn't need to take it to heart," that madam hurriedly guaranteed, completely ignoring the victim's family standing on the side. The shadow guard on the side looked at Mo Xiaobao with eyes full of admiration. Their family's little Shizi was so young, yet he already knew the art of lying. What was avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial? What was lying without blinking? He really had a bright future. Of course, if one ignored the fact that the puppy that fell into the water was accidentally dropped by the little heir, if one ignored the fact that the puppy only fell after young Mistress Mu entered the imperial garden, if one ignored the fact that the puppy was wet and colorful after the little heir wiped it dry. Actually, their little heir wasn't lying. She then looked at the pitiful faces of the women who had been deceived by the little heir and secretly shook her head. If they had the time to pity the little heir, who sometimes even made the prince suffer in silence, they might as well pity the puppy that had run off to take a bath somewhere. Yi patted her son's little head. She seemed to be comforting him, but in fact, she was warning him not to overdo it. Mo Xiaobao blinked and obediently shrunk back to Yi Li's side. Holding Lung Juanhan's hand with his left hand and Mu Lai with his right, he looked like an obedient child. Yi Li looked at young Madame Mu, who was so angry that her face turned green. She smiled faintly and said, "It's my son's mischievous behavior. Please forgive him." Her son and young Master Mu hit it off at first sight. Let them play together for a while. What do you think, young madam? A trace of disgust flashed across young Madame Mu's face. She said coldly, "Mu Lai is naughty and rude by nature. I'm afraid he will lead the little heir astray." Everyone was silent. Was there something wrong with this woman's brain? Most people could guess the reason for young Madame Mu's behavior. After all, many people knew that the little heir of Marquis Muyang's birth mother was the capital's #1 dancer, Yaoji. However, as a smart madam, was it really good to ruin the reputation of the only male in the family, not to mention whether they could offend the Princeton mansion now? They had been married for several years and had not given birth to a daughter. Who knew if they would have to rely on this illegitimate son in the future? Yi Li frowned with displeasure. Young Madame Mu was still questioning the upbringing of the Princeton mansion just now. It seems that young Madame Mu doesn't think that the little heir will lead her son astray. She's just afraid that her son will lead the little heir astray. Princess consort, you must be joking. It is Lime Er's fortune to be favored by the little heir. Young Madame Mu still wanted to say something, but a stern female voice came from behind the crowd. Young Madame Mu's face paled. The crowd parted to let her through. It was Marquis Muyang's wife who walked forward with a stern expression. "Mother," young Madame Mu said unwillingly. "Shut up." Marquis Muyang's wife glared at her fiercely. She turned to Yi Li and bowed slightly. "Daughter-in-law is not sensible. Princess consort, please don't take offense." Yi Li smiled. Marquis Muyang's wife is joking. It's all the children's mischief. Young Madame Mu, please change your clothes first. Princess consort is right. Marquis Muyang's wife nodded. She said to young Madame Mu, "Why aren't you going? What are you doing in such a disheveled state?" Young Madame Mu blushed. She glared at Mu Lai unwillingly and turned to leave. Yaoji glanced at Yi Li and also turned to follow. The others saw that Princess Ding's expression was not good. They also knew that it was not the time to talk. They all took their leave and went to stroll around the imperial garden. Marquis Muyang's wife gave Mu Lai a few instructions and also took her leave. "Greetings to Princess consort, little Shitsi." Mu Lai cupped his hands and bowed respectfully to the two. Lung Junhan looked curiously at the new brother in front of her with wide eyes. Mo Xiaobao said unhappily, "Shitsi is Shitsi. Why do you have to add the word little?" Yi Li pinched his little face in annoyance. "You're so nosy. How have you been recently?" The last sentence was naturally for Mu Lai. When she chose this child to follow Yaoji back to the capital, this child naturally went through strict training. Even Yi Li thought highly of this 11-year-old child, who looked like he was only 7 or 8 years old. To be able to survive under Qin Feng's hands, he was definitely an expert. So Mu Lai's role was not as simple as pretending to be Yaoji and Muyang's son. When it came to important times, he was even more important than Yaoji herself. "Thank you for Princess Consort's concern. Lai is very good," Mu Lai said seriously with a little adult face. Yi Li smiled and rubbed his little head. "You're just a child. Why are you so serious? Aren't you afraid of scaring Muyang?" Mu Lai stiffened at the sudden intimacy. His originally serious little face was a little red, but he didn't realize it. He said seriously, "They will only think that I'm young and mature, a genius." Yi Li smiled. "I can see that the people of Marquis Muyang's household quite like you." Humph. Mu Lai curled his lips. As long as it's a son of Marquis Muyang's household, they will like it. I heard that Marquis Muyang's wife has been going crazy for a grandson these past few years. She kept stuffing women into Muyang's room until we entered Marquis Muyang's household. But she still wants a legitimate son, so she gives that woman medicine every day. Taking too much medicine really affects the brain. Humph. Yili straightened his clothes and said softly, "In a few days, Prince and I will leave the capital. Lung Air is now at the border. Feng Sand will also go with us. At that time, only you and Yaoji will be left in the capital. You must be careful, okay? If you encounter any trouble, escape first. Keeping your life is more important than anything else." Mu Lai's eyes flickered. He said seriously, "Princess Consort, don't worry. Yaoji is not a fool, and neither am I. The people of Marquis Muyang's household will not doubt. We will take care of the matters in Chu capital. We will not let Prince and Princess Consort worry." Yili sighed apologetically. "You are still a child." Chapter 629. Mu Lai's hair stood on end. "I'm not a child. I'm Qilin." Okay. Yili quickly comforted him. "When you come back, I'll ask Qin Feng to make an exception and accept you into Qilin. So, you have to be careful." "Thank you, Princess," Mu Lai said happily. He believed that his ability was not inferior to others, but Commander Qin always forbade him from joining Qilin because he was young. Humph. Wasn't he also on a mission now? And it was a mission that those tall and stupid bulls could never replace. Just by looking at Mu Lai's expression, she knew what he was thinking. Yili just smiled faintly and shook her head. "It's on fire. It's on fire." Suddenly, there was a noise in the distance. Yili stood up and looked in the direction of the noise. 2 guards were standing on the left and right of Mo Xiaobao and Lung Junhan. Mu Lai stood on a stool and looked. He raised his eyebrows and said, "That's the direction of the Cold Palace. It's the Qiuliang Palace. Noble Consort Liu is currently imprisoned there." Qiuliang Palace? What a coincidence. The Qiuliang Palace is on fire? Yili muttered. After thinking for a while, she ordered the guard beside her. "Take the little heir to find the prince. I'll go and take a look." "Princess?" the guard behind her said hesitantly. Yili shook her head. "There won't be any danger in the palace. Protect the 3 children.
Go."
Mu Lai was dissatisfied. "This young master doesn't need protection." "Princess, I'll protect you." Yili found it funny. "That won't do. If you go with me now, people will suspect you. Be good and follow Xiaobao and Junhan. I'll leave these 2 brats to you." Without giving Mu Lai a chance to refute, Yili flew out. Mu Lai had a serious expression on his face, but his little ears were red. He glanced at Xiaobao awkwardly and muttered, "All right, this young master will do his best to protect you." Xiaobao rolled his eyes. "Who needs your protection?" Lung Junhan smiled and extended her hand to Mu Lai.
"Brother, Bao Bao."
"Little dummy Lung, do you even know who's close and who's distant?" Mo Xiaobao was furious.
"Oh."
"Little dummy Lung, little treasure Mo." Mo Xiaobao's face darkened. Your sister." By the time Yili arrived at the Autumn Cool Palace Hall, the fire had already burned down half of the side hall. The Autumn Cool Palace could be said to be the cold palace of the cold palaces. It had been in disrepair for many years and was overgrown with weeds. It was hard to believe that this was the imperial palace. Usually, people rarely came here, not to mention that today was the coronation ceremony. Naturally, no one would come here. Even if there was a fire, the palace maids and eunuchs saw it from afar. It would take them a long time to pass through the overlapping corridors of the palace. At least when Yili arrived, there was not a single person who came to put out the fire. "Princess." In the end, the guards did not all stay by Mo Xiaobao's side. 2 of them chased after Yili. "Help! Help!" A weak cry for help came from inside. Yili frowned. This was not noble consort Lu's voice. Yili would never mistake noble consort Lu's arrogant and indifferent voice. Even if she was weak, she would not sound like this. Help! Yili flew into the autumn cool palace hall. The two guards were startled and wanted to follow her in. Yili's voice came from inside. Stay outside. The autumn cool palace hall was a side hall. It was not big inside. So, when Yili went in, she saw the woman lying on the ground. She quickly stopped the two guards who wanted to follow her in. The woman was wearing a light pink dress. Looking at her figure, she should be a young girl. And from the material of her dress, it was clear that she was not a palace maid. Stepping forward to help the young girl up, Yili quickly went outside. Fortunately, the young girl should have run outside when she saw the fire. But for some reason, she fell down a few steps away from the door. If she fell deeper, with her voice, they would not be able to hear her. Bringing the young girl out of the autumn cool palace hall, she put her down on the blue stone road outside. Turning around, the fire had already surrounded the entire autumn cool palace hall. If they came 1 or 2 steps later, the young girl would have been burned to death inside. Princess, noble consort Lu, the guard behind her reminded. Yili shook her head and said, Forget it. The fire is too big. Let's wait until the fire is extinguished. He bent over and brushed away the long hair on the girl's face, revealing a delicate and pretty face. However, there was a burnt scar on the left side of her face, from the corner of her eye to her earlobe. There were also some burn marks on her clothes. The guard lowered his head to examine her and said she was drugged. Something from the fire must have fallen on her face to wake her up. Then she struggled to crawl out. This is... Yili looked at the young girl's unharmed face. Although they had not seen each other for many years, and she was still young at the time, her memory was still clear. However, Yili's good memory allowed her to recognize the identity of the girl in front of her. Noble consort Lu, the daughter of Lu and Mo Jingqi, the second princess of Chu. Princess Zhenning. Princess Zhenning, who was on the ground, forced herself to open her eyes. No matter how powerful the knockout powder was, the deep burn on her face left a palm-sized scar. Coupled with the thrill and despair she had just escaped death, she didn't have much energy left in her. Yili lowered her head to look at the young girl on the ground. She had never seen a young girl with such a pair of lifeless eyes. After the relief from escaping death, they instantly became lifeless without a trace of life. Raising her head to look at the burning autumn cool palace hall, and then looking at Princess Zhenning's trembling body, Yili could almost guess what had happened. It's fine, Yili said in a low voice. Princess Zhenning stared at her in a daze. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A line of tears slowly fell from the corners of her eyes into her black hair. Chapter 630. Most of the buildings in the Imperial Palace were made of pure wood, and the borders were painted with all kinds of colors as decorations. Once the fire was ignited, it naturally became more and more intense. In less than a quarter of an hour, the entire autumn cool palace was surrounded by a sea of fire, and even the surrounding palaces began to spread. Yili and the others could only bring Princess Zhenning to the Imperial Garden far away from the autumn cool palace. Placing Princess Zhenning on the side of a small lake that was wide, flat, and well ventilated, she looked at the fire in the distance and ordered, "Go call for an imperial physician."
Li.
Before the imperial physician arrived, the white-clothed Mo Xiaoyao had already rushed over like the wind. Seeing that Yili was fine, he let out a sigh of relief. Glancing at Princess Zhenning, he raised his eyebrows at Yili. Yili shook her head, speechless. It wasn't appropriate to talk about these things in front of Princess Zhenning at this time. Behind them, Mo Xiaobao was carried over by a guard, and behind him was Lung Junhan, who was also being carried. Mother! Mo Xiaobao cheerfully jumped down from the guard's arms and pounced on Yili. But halfway through, Mo Xiaoyao grabbed him by the back of his clothes and hung him in the air, waving his arms and legs. Mother, mother, this child was so worried about you. Imperial father is bad. Let go of me. I want mother. Yili took him from Emo Xiaoyao's arms in amusement, patting him comfortingly with a smile. Mother is fine. I told you to be careful. Good child. Emo Xiaobao rubbed himself against Yili's chest in satisfaction, ignoring Emo Xiaoyao's gloomy expression, and nodded repeatedly. It's good that mother is fine. This child loves mother the most. Princess Zhenning, who was sitting against the rockery, looked at the giggling Emo Xiaobao in Yili's arms, then looked at the gentle smile on Yili's face, and a trace of envy and bitterness flashed through her eyes. Yili saw this and placed Emo Xiaobao on the ground. She squatted down and asked softly, Princess Zhenning, are you okay? Princess Zhenning nodded and said in a low voice, Many thanks to Princess Ding for saving my life. Facing the elegant and graceful woman in front of her, she really didn't have the face to face her. She knew what her consort Mu Fei had done, but it was Ding Wang Fei who had disregarded her relationship with her consort Mu Fei and saved her life. As for her biological mother, not only did she use her, she even almost killed her.
Why?
Why was her mother such a person? Sister.
Sister.
A series of hurried shouts could be heard. The Duke of Qin had rushed over with his 8-year-old brother after hearing the news. Following behind them were Mo Jingli and the other princes of the imperial family and the nobles of the imperial court. The fire in the Autumn Cool Palace wasn't small. Although people had already gone to put out the fire, today's windy weather made the fire even worse. It had already spread to 3 or 4 palaces. Even if they were standing in the opposite corner of the Autumn Cool Palace, they could still feel the intensity of the fire. Mo Xiaoyan rushed over and immediately saw Princess Zhenning sitting on the ground. He quickly rushed forward. Royal sister, how are you? Are you injured? Princess Zhenning quickly covered the scar on her face with her hands, saying it's nothing serious. But how could she cover that new scar with her hands? Everyone sucked in a breath of air without hesitation. The originally delicate and gentle young girl now had a palm-sized scar on her face. At this moment, that scar still had the feeling of being burned by the fire, making people want to vomit when they saw it. Many of the madams and young misses who came with them all cried out and retreated 2 steps. Princess Zhenning's face darkened, and she lowered her head even more timidly, wanting to use her hair to cover the scar on her face. Don't use your hair. If your hair isn't clean, it will easily get infected if it touches the wound. A slender hand gently pressed down on her shoulder, gently pressing down on her hand that wanted to pull her hair. Princess Zhenning was stunned. She raised her head and stared blankly at the woman with a faint smile on her lips. There wasn't the slightest bit of disgust or fear on her face, but from her gentle and clear eyes, she saw her ugly self. Princess Zhenning trembled and quickly lowered her head. Yili sighed softly and took out a plain white silk handkerchief, carefully tying it around Princess Zhenning's face to cover the hideous scar. Wait for the imperial physician to come and prescribe some medicine to treat the scar. You'll be fine very soon. De Chu State's female upbringing was very strict. Unmarried maidens also had the habit of wearing a veil when they went out. Therefore, after Princess Zhenning put on a veil, although she looked a bit out of the ordinary among the unmarried maidens, it wasn't considered out of place. The surrounding people also let out a sigh of relief. Most of them were maidens who had been raised in their boudoirs. When had they ever seen that kind of scar?
It was good that it was covered now.
At the same time, more people turned their gazes towards the gentle and elegant white-clothed woman. They were full of admiration for Princess Ding's calm demeanor. What exactly happened? Mo Jingli glanced at Yili, who had returned to Mo Xiaoyao's side, and asked in a deep voice. Princess Zhenning gently bit her lip and refused to speak. Mo Jingli looked towards Yili. Yili calmly said, We only rushed over when we saw the fire in the imperial garden. We only had time to save Princess Zhenning. We don't know if there was anyone else inside. Mo Jingli frowned and asked, Why would Princess Zhenning be in the Autumn Cool Palace at this time? Princess Zhenning refused to speak. Mo Xiaoyan took a deep breath and stood up. He patted his younger brother, who was hiding in fear beside him, and said, "Imperial grandmother locked my imperial mother in the autumn cool palace. Imperial sister went to visit imperial mother." That's right. It was Aijia who locked her in the autumn cool palace. The Empress Dowager slowly walked over, surrounded by a group of palace maids and eunuchs. She just happened to hear Mo Xiaoyan's words and calmly replied. Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, "Noble consort Lu was locked in the autumn cool palace? How come I didn't know?" The Empress Dowager sneered, "This is an internal matter. How come Aijia didn't know? I still have to discuss with Prince Li how to punish the late imperial concubine who didn't abide by the rules." Mo Jingli had nothing to say. Even though he was dissatisfied with the Empress Dowager punishing noble consort Lu behind his back, he couldn't say it in front of so many people. After all, even the Prince Regent could only manage government affairs. On the surface, he absolutely couldn't interfere with the matters of the late Empress Palace. After a moment of silence, Mo Jingli said, "Since that's the case, I don't know if noble consort Lu died in the fire." Everyone looked towards Princess Zhenning. At this time, the fire was still burning. Other than Princess Zhenning, no one knew the situation inside. No one knew if noble consort Lu was burned to death inside. But Princess Zhenning clenched her teeth and refused to speak. No one could do anything. Mo Xiaoyao's gaze swept over everyone indifferently. Just when Mo Jingli thought he was going to say something important, he heard Mo Xiaoyao leisurely say, "Since something happened in the palace, I think this banquet can't be held. I and Wang Fei will return to the Fu first. In addition, I and Wang Fei will be leaving for the northwest in a few days. At that time, we won't be coming to say goodbye." Mo Jingli secretly sighed in relief and nodded. Then, "Prince Ding, please leave first." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. With one hand holding Mo Xiaobao and the other holding Yili's hand, he prepared to leave the palace. Chapter 631. Princess Ding. Mo Xiaoyan, who hadn't said anything, suddenly opened his mouth. He walked in front of Yili and said in a deep voice, "Thank you for saving my imperial sister. I can't repay you for saving my life. Please accept a bow from this little prince." After speaking, he bowed deeply to Yili. Yili, seeing the 12 to 13-year-old youth bowing so solemnly, Yili smiled faintly and said, "Duke of Qin is too polite.
It's just a small matter."
"Duke of Qin, please take good care of Princess Zhenning. Farewell." Seeing the family of three walk out of the imperial garden surrounded by guards, Mo Jingli's heart relaxed. Only now did he truly believe that perhaps Mo Xiaoyao really wasn't interested in Chu state's matters. In the carriage leaving the palace, Leng Junhan, who was lying in Yili's arms, had already fallen asleep from exhaustion. Mo Xiaobao sat in Mo Xiaoyao's arms. Although he hadn't fallen asleep, he didn't have the same energy as when he was in the palace. After all, he was only a 5 to 6-year-old child. Making a fuss for half a day was enough to tire them out. Yili gently patted Leng Junhan and asked, "Xiaoyao, is noble consort Lu dead?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. Noble consort Lu has been in the imperial harem for more than 10 years. Even if the monkeys scatter when the tree falls, she still has some power that she can use. Today there are so many people coming and going in the palace. It's not impossible for her to escape the palace." Yili frowned and said, "Since she still has people she can use, why did she treat Princess Zhenning like that? Could it be that she really wanted to burn Princess Zhenning to death?" Thinking of this, Yili couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. How ruthless did she have to be to treat her own daughter like that? Even if this daughter's father wasn't the person she loved, the child was still her flesh and blood. Princess Zhenning risked being punished by the Empress Dowager to see her, but she received such a return. No wonder her eyes were like dead ashes when she was rescued. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "I don't know. Tell the people below to pay attention." Once that woman appears, kill her without mercy. He wasn't interested in whether noble consort Lu wanted to burn Princess Jinning to death, or why she wanted to burn Princess Jinning to death. But if it was true, noble consort Lu had to die. Keeping such a vicious and merciless woman alive would definitely be a disaster. Yili nodded silently. She had no pity or sympathy for noble consort Lu. I heard from Xiaobao that Mu Yang's wife was rude to you in the garden? Emo Xiaoyao asked faintly, throwing the matter of noble consort Lu to the back of his mind. Yili glanced at Emo Xiaobao, who was complaining first, and said with a smile, "She's just a woman twisted by jealousy. Do you think I can deal with her? Don't worry, Yaoji is not easy to deal with." I won't let her have an easy time. Emo Xiaoyao snorted softly and said, "Sure enough, I was too soft-hearted to Marquis Muyang's mansion back then." Thinking of some of the grievances with Marquis Muyang's mansion, Emo Xiaoyao regretted his plan to use Marquis Muyang's mansion to hide Yaoji and Mu Lai in the capital, because this meant that he couldn't do anything to Marquis Muyang's mansion for the time being. But as soon as he saw the people of Marquis Muyang's mansion, especially Marquis Muyang himself, some bad memories that he tried hard to forget surged up again, making Emo Xiaoyao's mood very bad. On the day of the new emperor's ascension, a fire broke out in the palace, almost burning half of the palace. This news quickly spread among the people. People were talking about how the new emperor was immoral and couldn't bear to inherit the throne, so the heavens punished him and so on. Hearing this, the people in the Prince Ding mansion laughed secretly. The new emperor was only a child of 6 or 7 years old. What could they say about him being immoral? But once the comments started, it wasn't so easy to destroy them. Especially when there were people who wanted to add fuel to the fire, the comments spread like wildfire. The people in the Prince Ding mansion didn't pay attention to these, because they were all packing up and preparing to leave the capital again to go back to the northwest. Although most of them were born and raised in the Chu capital, living in the northwest for the past few years made them feel a sense of belonging to Glass City. Everyone had joyful smiles on their faces as they packed their luggage and prepared to depart. And in the imperial court, other than Prince Li officially becoming the regent, the news of the Empress's death and noble consort Lu's burial was also announced. And the Empress Dowager, who was supposed to be the Empress Dowager, was exempted from being buried with the Empress Dowager because the Empress Dowager couldn't bear the burden of the previous emperor's first wife's death. She was temporarily buried in the imperial mausoleum. In the future, when the Empress Dowager passed away, she would be buried in the imperial mausoleum. Ignoring the turmoil in the capital, Emo Xiaoyao and his group left the capital 3 days later and returned to the northwest. Not only was there a graceful and beautiful middle-aged woman in their carriage, there was also a similarly beautiful and moving young woman and an old man with an extraordinary bearing. Tian Xiang. In the carriage, Yili reached out to hold Hua Tian Xiang's hand, who was still in shock, and smiled slightly. Hua Tian Xiang's beautiful face was still filled with shock. She stared blankly at Yili for a long while before letting out a soft sigh. "Lear, Aunt." The Empress nodded and tenderly stroked her black hair. She said softly, "Tian Xiang, it's been hard on you these past few years." She was the Duke of Hua's first wife's granddaughter and the Empress's niece. She was the envy of all the noble ladies in the capital. But at the same time, because of this identity, she was still unmarried, even though she was already over 20 years old. A normal woman at this age would already be a housewife, and a housewife. But she could only hide from attention. For example, instead of praying for her grandmother in the temple, it was more like she was cultivating while wearing her hair. Hua Tian Xiang shook her head and smiled. "Aunt, what are you talking about? I eat well and wear good clothes. How could I have suffered? But you, Aunt, seeing you is really..." Hua Tian Xiang's eyes reddened. Originally, when she heard the news in Ciyun Temple, she really thought that her aunt had passed away. But this morning, she was doing her morning ritual in her room as usual when she was suddenly drugged and knocked out. She didn't expect to see her aunt, who she thought had passed away, and her friend, who she hadn't seen for many years. And they were already on the carriage to the northwest. It was no wonder that she hadn't recovered for a long time. Lear and I. Looking at the two people in front of her, Hua Tianxiang still wanted to ask something, but she didn't know where to start. Yili took her hand and smiled. The Duke of Hua has handed you over to me. In the future, Miss Hua will have to trouble you to go to the northwest and live a hard life. Its grandfather, Hua Tianxiang said with some excitement. She suddenly remembered that when her grandfather came to see her a few days ago, he said some strange things. At that time, she didn't think too much about it. So her grandfather had already planned to entrust her to Lili? The Empress said softly, "Your grandfather is doing it for your own good. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, Prince Li is the regent. A few days ago, Prince Li vaguely mentioned that he wanted to marry you as a concubine. Although father rejected him on the spot, as long as you are still in the boudoir, it will always be." Hua Tianxiang wiped her tears and said, "I know grandfather is doing it for my own good. But we are all gone. Grandfather, Don't worry, the Duke of Hua is a person of virtue and prestige. Mo Jingli has just taken power, so he won't do anything to the Duke of Hua. However, to avoid trouble, you should change your name. And the Empress, Sister Hua as well." Chapter 632. The two nodded. Of course, they understood Yi Li's words. Although there weren't many people who had seen them, they still had to take precautions. If people knew that so many people who shouldn't have appeared in Glass City, especially the Prince Ding mansion, it would be bad for the Prince Ding mansion and the Hua family. Hua Tianxiang thought for a while and said generously, "My grandfather's surname is Yang. Let's call him Ruo Hua." The Empress smiled faintly and said, "In that case, I will borrow Tianxiang's surname. Call me Lady Yang." She didn't even want to give her a name. Yili sighed softly and looked at the Empress with some worry. The Empress smiled and said, "To be able to get rid of the shackles of the palace is already the luckiest thing in my life. What's more, there is Changluo in the northwest. Everything will be fine. I'm just afraid that Feng San." Yili frowned. Since Feng Huiting was persuaded by Feng Jiao to go back to the northwest with them, the relationship between Feng Jiao and his son gradually became less stiff. Feng Huiting was different from the Empress and Hua Tianxiang. He was openly taken by Mo Xiaoyao from Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli had already emptied the Feng family. Naturally, he didn't care about Feng Huiting, an old man who was nearly 60 years old. Even the other members of the Feng family could be taken away with him. However, the two sons of the Feng family were unwilling to go to the northwest and live under their brother's roof. What's more, they were now valued by Prince Li. Lady Feng was very angry with her husband's decision. Naturally, she stood on her son's side. In the entire Feng family, except for a few loyal servants and young children of concubines, no one was willing to follow Feng Huiting, who had no wealth and power, to the northwest to suffer. But Master Feng. Although Feng Huiting didn't say it clearly, Yili could still see his attitude towards the matter between Feng Jiao and the Empress. The Empress shook her head and said with a smile, "Yao didn't have parents to care for him since he was young. He always values relationships more than others. In the future, with his father watching over him, he will slowly understand. After so many years, I'm tired too. As long as Tianxiang and Changluo are well in the future, I have no regrets." Yi Li remained silent. It was difficult for outsiders to interfere in matters of the heart. The matter between Feng Jiao and the Empress could only be solved by themselves. Hua Tianxiang looked at the two in confusion, but she also felt that the atmosphere was a bit heavy. She smiled and said, "Of course we will be fine. Everyone will be fine. And please call me Ruahua, lest you accidentally call me Ruahua in the future." The three of them smiled. Yili nodded and said, "That's right. We'll all be fine." In a dark corner of the capital, there was a woman in a sorry state. She was thin and wore plain gray clothes. Her hair was only held up with a crude wooden hairpin. It was almost impossible to see her original appearance. Hiding in a small, dilapidated house in the innermost part of this cold, almost deserted alley, a pair of eyes emitted a chilling light in the darkness. Prince Ding has already left the Chu capital? That's right. This morning, Prince Ding brought the princess and the heir out of the city. A deep and hoarse male voice said in a low voice, "It's already been so many days. You still haven't found a way to send me out of the city." The woman's voice was sharp and angry. The man rubbed his hands and said with some difficulty, "Right now, the entire city is under martial law. I heard that when the new emperor ascended the throne, a fire started in the heavenly palace. It even burned Princess Zhenning's face. I'm afraid that the higher-ups are catching the assassins." The woman's eyes widened in shock. Because she hadn't seen the sun for many days, her pale face revealed obvious shock. The man thought that she was frightened and hurriedly held her hand and comforted her. "Don't be afraid. The assassins wouldn't come to this kind of place." Looking at the woman in front of him, who was still shockingly beautiful even though she wore coarse clothes and no makeup, the man's eyes changed. His hand moved up unruly. A trace of impatience flashed across the woman's face. She waved him away and said, "Get lost, I'm not in the mood, darling. Don't worry, we'll soon find a way to leave the city, darling." The man lazily picked up the woman and pressed her down on the bed. His eyes flashed with shocking lust as he buried his head in the woman's body and kissed her. The woman endured the disgust in her heart and let the man do whatever he wanted to her body. However, his thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. How could Zhenning be burned? She was worried that Zhenning would ruin her plans, so she drugged her. However, she clearly told her to send Zhenning out after she left and then set fire to the autumn cool palace. However, she didn't know that she needed someone to burn to death in her place. Not someone who would be burned to death, but someone who would be burned to death. The people who worked for her were all people of flesh and blood. How could they be willing to throw away their lives, or let the people they were familiar with die? Princess Zhenning, who had been drugged by noble consort Liu, was naturally the best scapegoat. Otherwise, when Princess Zhenning woke up and told others, they wouldn't be able to escape either. Zhenning, don't blame Imperial Mother. Imperial Mother didn't want to burn you to death. This was just an accident. Who told you to, darling? Why aren't you paying attention? The man said unhappily. His average-looking face was flushed red as he fiercely kissed the woman's soft red lips. The woman closed her eyes in disgust. Compared to this vulgar man in front of her, Mo Jingqi was a stunningly handsome man. But now, she could only rely on this man to escape from the Chu capital. Mo Xiuyao. Yili, it's all your fault. It's all your fault, darling. You're so beautiful. The man impatiently tore apart the woman's clothes. He had never seen such a beautiful woman in his life. In the past, he wouldn't even have dared to think about this kind of luck. But now, this beautiful woman belonged to him and would become his wife in the future. In a dark little house in a dark alleyway, there were waves of ambiguous gasps, which were soon joined by a woman's soft moans. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.